They took away his skill at the cost of 2 million threat points and threw him out into the snow at minus 62 degrees. 6 hours until death. No clan, no cloak, no numbers. All that remained was the F-rank trash passive he'd been hiding from everyone for 10 years. And it all started with a kiss on the temple. Soedin brought him some kalguksu. She smiled. She kissed him. And an hour later, that same hand drove a needle containing a paralyzing D-rank drug. Han Ji-woon's body went limp on the cot. Jisoo's younger brother was already pinning his wrists to the mattress with his knee. On the table, the clan's artifact flashed blue. A skill transfer contract. That very B-rank item that Jiyeon himself had pulled out of the dungeon 3 years ago and placed in the family vault. Now it was working against him. Jisoo touched the artifact, and Jiyeon felt something hot pulling from his chest, heavier than blood. The SSS rank skill, Flame Resonance, flowed out of him like molten metal through a crack. He had cultivated this skill for 10 years. For 10 years, he had held third place on the global hunter rankings. 2,040,000 threat points. Everyone was known to everyone from Seoul to Mexico City. Now it was melting in the status window like ice in the palm of his hand. Combat skill. None. 2 gray words where a golden SSS had glowed just a second ago. Jisoo straightened up and smiled that smile cameras love so much at press conferences. He said his brother was too noble for this world. That SSS wasn't for those who wavered. He thanked her for saving the skill for him. Every word struck with the precision of poison. Eden sat down beside him. She adjusted Jiyeon's collar, with the same motion she'd used to fix the entire engagement. For 7 months, she'd fallen asleep beside him. For 7 months, she'd worn the ring bearing the Han clan's crest. And now she said she wouldn't marry a man without a skill? A steady voice, not a single tremor. She'd rehearsed that line. Jiyeon understood from the pause she placed exactly where it sounded most convincing. Professional. Her body wouldn't obey. The poison was attacking his A-rank resistance, and there was nothing left in his blood to burn it away. 2 guards grabbed him and dragged him toward the bunker's airlock. The corridors were empty. The entire clan was preparing for tomorrow, for the ice apocalypse, for the second phase of the breach. 17 years ago, the sky cracked over Seoul, and the world learned to live with monsters, mana, and the system. But no one was prepared for the temperature to drop 4 degrees a day. Bunkers, towers, supplies, all of this went to those who had the numbers. Jiyeon no longer had the numbers. They threw him into an armored transport and drove him north, for 70 kilometers of silence. The driver never once turned around. He was paid not to turn around. The door opened. Jiyeon was shoved out into the snow. The wind hit his face like a fist. Minus 62. By morning, it would be minus 70. The vehicle turned around and drove away. The red lights vanished into the blizzard in 9 seconds. He lay on his back under a gray sky without a single star, and in the status window, a line he hadn't seen since he was 16 glowed. Broken inventory. Rank F, 50-slot storage. Cannot be upgraded. Trash passive. A disgrace he'd hidden from everyone, including Irin, and now it was all he had left. His hands were numb. He rolled onto his side. Snow had packed into his sleeves, his boots, and up his collar. His jaw clenched so tightly that his teeth were chattering, not from fear, but from a spasm. He knew the number. 6 hours. Maybe 5. Without skills, without gear, without shelter, the body gives out in 6 hours. First the fingers, then the feet, then consciousness. And then he stood up. His legs wouldn't bend, but he stood up. The first step felt as if he were carrying the entire bunker on his shoulders. a bunker that no longer belonged to him. He walked because lying down meant losing. It meant that Jisoo had won, that Eren had made the right choice, that the number 2,040,000 would forever be associated with his brother's name, not his own. On his third step, he spoke aloud what would become his prayer for the next 60 days. I will return every digit, with interest. The wind carried the words away, but the system. In the right corner of the status window, the inventory icon flashed. Once. Briefly. He didn't notice. He kept walking. An hour later, he stumbled upon a rock. An icy rat was sitting under the rock. A minor creature, rank F. Any E-rank hunter would have swatted it with a flick of the wrist. But June lacked the skill. He lifted the rock with both hands and brought it crashing down. Once. Twice. On the third strike, the rat froze. He sat over the corpse, gasping for air. Steam escaped his mouth and froze instantly. He glanced at his hands. Blue. The tips were turning white. Second stage frostbite. Another 3 hours. He opened his inventory out of habit. 50 empty slots. A gray grid. He tossed the rat's corpse into the first slot. He picked up a shard of ice from under a rock and tossed it in there too, without thinking, without calculating. His fingers simply couldn't hold objects one at a time anymore. The status window flashed so brightly that he squinted. Synthesis successful. Obtained. Icy Heart of Immortality. Rank A. Plus 12,000 threat points. He opened his eyes. Lying in the slot was an item not found in any of the guild's catalogs. A blue crystal the size of a quail's egg. He activated it. Warmth surged through his body like the first sip of water after 3 days of thirst. His fingers turned pink. His breathing evened out. The frostbite receded. The threat points figure jumped from 0 to 12,000. Hunter rank. E. He stared at that number and thought. Right now, in Jisoo's bunker, a public scan is taking place. In front of the cameras. A new heir. A new hero. And the scanner gives him 1,980,000. 60,000 below the standard. The contract ate up part of the skill during transfer. Jisoo already knows. Jisoo is already angry. Jisoo is already looking for someone to blame. And here in the wasteland, at minus 62 degrees, a man with no name, no clan, and no heir's cloak has just squeezed 12,000 points out of a rat's corpse and a chunk of ice. And ahead lies a whole wasteland littered with corpses. Han Ji-woon smiled. For the first time in 10 hours. His lips were chapped from the cold, and blood remained on his teeth. But it was good blood. Blood that tasted of interest. The warmth from the icy heart of immortality lasted exactly 40 minutes. Then the crystal dimmed and the cold returned. Not immediately. First, a tingling in his fingertips. Then, a burning in his feet. Then, the familiar clenching of his jaw. The A-rank artifact turned out to be a consumable rather than a permanent enhancement. Jian stood in the middle of the white plain and did the math. 40 minutes of warmth for 1 rat and 1 shard. That meant he needed another rat. He looked around. Snow. Snow stretching to the horizon in all 4 directions. Not a single rock, not a single burrow, not a single movement. Only the wind. Minus 62, and the temperature was dropping by the hour. He headed north because the wind was blowing from the south, and walking against the wind at that temperature meant losing face. Literally. Frostbite on exposed skin from the headwind set in within 4 minutes. After 20 minutes of walking, he saw a ravine, shallow, about 3 meters deep, dark spots at the bottom. He climbed down. The spots turned out to be corpses, 4 frozen rats, dead, frozen solid. Something had killed them earlier. He looked at the tracks, Wide paw prints, claws deep in the snow. An ice wolf. At least B rank, maybe A. The wolf killed the rats but didn't eat them, so it wasn't hungry. So it's about territory. So it will return. Gian crouched down and began working quickly. The first rat carcass into his inventory. A shard of ice from the ravine wall went in there too. The status window flashed. Synthesis successful. Icy Heart of Immortality. Rank A. Plus 12,000 HP. Warmth flooded his body. But this time, he noticed something else. The temperature in the status window. Internal body temperature. 36.4. It was 36.6 before synthesis. The reactor took 0.2 of a degree, the price of conversion. He remembered the gray text in the inventory description that he had always ignored. Every synthesis requires the owner's body heat. 10 failed syntheses in a row, irreversible hypothermia. With minus 62 outside and 36.4 inside, the margin for error narrowed with every roll. Second corpse, ice shard. Synthesis success, 36.2, plus 12,000 XP. Total, 36,000. Third corpse, shard. Synthesis success, 36.0, 48,000 SP. Fourth corpse, the last one. He reached for the ice shard and his hand trembled, not from the cold, from realization. 35.8 after the next synthesis. This is already severe hypothermia. His muscles would start to work worse, coordination would drop, and somewhere up above, a B rank or higher ice wolf was prowling. He placed the fourth corpse in the cell. He hesitated, and added the shard. 35.8. Synthesis successful. 60,000 SP, rank D. 4 ice hearts in his inventory. Each provided 40 minutes of warmth, 2 hours and 40 minutes of life, plus whatever was burning inside him right now. A total of just over 3 hours before the cold catches up with him again. He climbed out of the ravine. The wind picked up. The blizzard was really starting to swirl, and visibility dropped to 20 meters. 10 minutes later, he caught a scent. Iron and wet fur. A wolf. Gian stopped. Ahead, in the white wall of the blizzard, 2 yellow lights at chest height. Eyes. An ice wolf emerged from the blizzard like a shadow separated from the snow. Massive. 6 feet tall at the withers. Its fur was covered in frost, and every hair stood on end like steel wire. The system automatically displayed the tag. Ice Wolf, rank A, 95,000 HP. June had 60,000. No combat skills, no weapons, no armor. Bare hands and the jacket they'd thrown him out to die in. The wolf didn't attack right away. He sniffed the air. He tilted his head. There was no hunger in his eyes, only territorial fury. This plane belonged to him, and a stranger stood in the middle of it. June opened his inventory. He looked at the 4 ice hearts, at the empty slots, at the number 35.8 degrees of internal temperature. And he did what no hunter in the history of the system had ever done. He pulled an ice heart from his inventory and threw it onto the snow, in front of the wolf. The crystal fell and glowed blue. Heat surged out in a wave. The wolf flinched. Its instinct told it to pick it up, to take the heat. It leaned toward the crystal, and June jumped. Not at the wolf, at a rock 3 meters to the right. He grabbed it and smashed it into the beast's skull just as its jaws closed around the crystal. The blow was weak. 60,000 HP without combat skills meant his body was faster and tougher than an ordinary human's, but not stronger than a C-rank hunter in direct combat. The stone cracked the wolf's skull, but didn't kill it. The beast spun around. Its paw slashed through the air. Its claws passed a centimeter from his throat. June fell backward. He rolled. The wolf leaped. June hurled the second ice heart at its snout. An explosion of blue heat blinded the beast for half a second. That was enough. Jian lifted the stone with both hands and struck again. In the same spot. The crack in the wolf's skull grew deeper. The beast howled. The sound was so loud that the snow around them trembled. A third blow. A fourth. On the fifth, the wolf collapsed. Its paws were still scraping the snow, but its eyes were already fading. June stood over it. His hands were shaking. His knuckles were scraped raw. Blood dripped over the stone and froze midair, turning into red beads. The system issued a notification. A-rank monster destroyed. Core obtained. He pulled the core from the wolf's body, a dark blue sphere the size of a fist. Hot. So hot that his glove began to smoke. He placed the core in his inventory and froze because the system suggested a new synthesis option. A-rank Ice Wolf core plus snow. Result? Golem. Snow Guardian number 1. It inherits 30% of the original's combat power. He stared at those lines, and numbers clicked in his head. 30% of 95,000 is 28,500 CP. An autonomous fighter, made from an enemy's corpse, with no limit on quantity. His hands stopped trembling, not from the heat, from realization. His inventory wasn't a junk bin, it was an arms factory, and the entire wasteland, full of frozen corpses and monsters, was his raw material. He initiated synthesis. 35.6. The snow before him rose in a column. It condensed. It took shape. A wolf of white ice rose onto all four paws. The same proportions. The same height at the withers. But its eyes were not yellow, but blue. Cold. Obedient. The Snow Guardian turned its head toward June. He waited. 600 kilometers to the south, in the Han Jisoo clan bunker, he stood before the journalists of the clan's media holding. Spotlights, microphones, plasma screens displaying his figure. 1,980,000 OU. A nice figure, but not SSS, and he knew it. He knew the contract had eaten up 60,000 during the transfer, and his face under the spotlights was perfect, but his jaw was clenched a little tighter than necessary. A reporter asked how he felt about becoming the heir. Jisoo smiled and said he felt a sense of responsibility toward everyone who trusted the Han clan in these dark days. The cameras caught the smile and broadcast it to screens in the towers across Korea. No one noticed how he clenched his fist behind his back. Not a single camera showed it. And in the wasteland, Jian walked alongside the golem and counted. Every corpse is essence. Every essence is growth. Every growth is a step back. Toward that number they stole from him, and beyond. The golem didn't sleep, didn't eat, didn't feel the cold. It walked beside him, and its icy paws left no tracks in the snow because it was part of that snow. Jian had been walking for 3 hours straight, and his legs were starting to give out. Not from the cold, the icy heart still provided warmth. From exhaustion. 12 hours without food, 6 hours of fighting and walking. His body begged for a rest, and the temperature beneath his jacket continued to drop. -64. In 2 hours, -65. The apocalypse was gaining momentum. He found a crevice in the rock face, narrow, 2 meters deep, enough to shelter from the wind. The golem lay across the entrance like a living door, and the wind crashed against its icy body. It grew quieter inside. Not warmer, but quieter. Jian sat down on a rock and opened his inventory. 46 slots were free. 2 were occupied by ice hearts. 1 by a core that hadn't gone into the golem. 1 was empty after synthesizing the Guardian. He began to calculate. Each synthesis was -0.2 of a degree on success. On failure, he didn't know. The description said a miss cost 3 degrees. 3 whole degrees for a single mistake. With his current 35.6, that meant 32.6. Loss of consciousness. Death in 30 minutes. There was absolutely no room for error. He closed his eyes and recalled everything he knew about synthesis. For 10 years, he had ignored this passive skill. For 10 years, he had been an SSS skill, and that gray icon in the corner of the status window seemed like the system's mockery to him. But he did remember something from the description. The value of the result depends on the dissonance between the ingredients. The more incompatible two items are, the more powerful the product. Ice and a rat carcass. Low dissonance. Both are cold. Both are dead. The result is stable but low. A rank. But what if he took ice and something hot? Ice and blood. Ice and the core of a fire monster. Maximum dissonance. Result. He didn't know what it would be, but the number had to be higher. His fingers clenched. There was nowhere to get a fire monster's core. But blood. His blood. It was still warm. He looked at his scraped knuckles. The blood had already congealed, but if he scraped off the crust, he scraped it off. Blood flowed again, dark, thick in the cold. He collected a few drops on a shard of rock and placed it in a compartment. He tossed a piece of clear ice from the wall of the crevice into the same compartment. He closed his eyes. The system processed the request. 1 second. 2. 3. Synthesis successful. Received. Crimson lens. Rank B. Effect. Detects monster cores within a 200-meter radius. Duration. 1 hour. Not a combat item. Reconnaissance. But right now, reconnaissance was more valuable than any weapon. 35.4. He activated the lens. The world before his eyes was veiled by a red filter, and the wasteland came to life. 6 dots, 6 cores, 4 small ones, F and E rank, rats or something similar. 1 medium-sized, C rank, far away, at the edge of the radius. And one bright one, pulsating, 100 meters away, right under the snow. A rank, maybe higher. He looked at the golem. The golem looked at him. 28,500 HP against something hiding 100 meters underground. Bad odds. He went to the 4 small dots. In 20 minutes, the golem had dug up 3 burrows, 9 ice rats. The golem crushed them with its paws, one after another. Gian collected the road. 9 bodies, 9 potential synths, 35.4 inside, and each roll costs 2/10. 9 rolls is minus 1.8 degrees. 33.6 on the way out. Dangerous. But if they're all successful, that's a plus 108,000 XP. Total 180,000 with what we have. Rank C. He started working. Corpse, ice, synthesis, success. 35.2. Corpse, ice, synthesis, success. 35.0. Corpse, ice, synthesis, success. 34. 8. 3 finished ice hearts. 96,000 HP. 4th roll. Corpse, ice, synthesis, success. 34.6. His hands began to tremble. Not from fear. His body was reacting to the drop in internal temperature. A slight tremor. Coordination was still normal, but his reserves were dwindling. 5th. Success. 34.4. 6th. Success. 34.2. He stopped. Looked at the remaining 3 corpses, at the internal temperature reading. 34.2 is already the danger zone. Below 34, confusion sets in. Below 33, The body stops responding. 3 corpses is another 36,000 OU, or death if even one synthesis fails. He placed the 7th corpse in the cell, added ice, closed his eyes. Success, 34.0. Right on the edge, the 8th. He looked at the rat's corpse in his trembling hands and thought about how Jisoo was sitting in a warm bunker right now, in a soft chair, with a cup of something hot, with the stolen 1,980,000 OU, with his fiancée, with his name on the screens. He tossed the carcass and the ice into the cell. Success, 33.8. 9th. Last. He could barely feel his fingers. The rat's carcass slipped out, and he caught it 3 seconds before the cell accepted the ingredients. Success, 33.6. The system updated his status. Han Ji-woon. Threat points 180,000. Rank C. 180,000. 3 hours ago, he had 0. Now he was stronger than any ordinary hunter in the bunkers. But his body cost him 33.6 degrees, and every breath felt like it was passing through a wet cloth. He activated Ice Heart. The warmth returned, but his internal temperature didn't rise. The hearts warmed him from the outside, while the reactor drew from within. They were different systems. He might not freeze from the wind, but he couldn't reclaim what he'd given up for synthesis. He needed another solution. Food, fire, shelter, something that would raise his body temperature, not just protect him from the external cold. He looked at the bright spot 100 meters under the snow. A rank, maybe higher. There was something alive down there, something warm, something with a core or thousands of essences. And between him and that core lay only 100 meters of frozen ground and a single golem with 28,500 HP. June stood up, 33.6 degrees inside, 180,000 HP remaining, 0 margin for error. He looked at the golem and for the first time that day gave a voice command. Dig. The golem dug through the snow and frozen ground without stopping. Its icy paws cut through the soil like butter because it was made of the same cold as this earth. June sat on the edge of the pit and counted the time. The crimson lens would go out in 12 minutes, and the bright spot below pulsed ever more intensely. Something sensed that they were digging toward it. At a depth of 4 meters, the golem stopped, its front paws pressed against a surface that wouldn't yield. June climbed down. He shone the activated ice heart. Beneath the layer of earth lay a wall. Not stone, not ice. Something else. A gray matte surface streaked with blue light. A material June had seen only once in his life, at 16, when he picked up a shard in the schoolyard. It was a fragment of the puncture's structure. A piece of an alien reality embedded in the ground, and inside it, a core was beating. He pressed his palm against the wall. The wall pulsed. Heat radiated from within, real heat, not an artifact's imitation. His reactor reacted instantly. The status window displayed lines he had never seen before. Compatible material detected. Direct synthesis via contact possible. Risk of failure 0%. 0. He read it 3 times. 0% chance of failure. The reactor recognized this material. They were from the same source. The shard that June had picked up 10 years ago and the wall beneath the frozen ground were parts of a single whole. June didn't hesitate. He placed his hand on the wall and activated his inventory. The gray surface beneath his fingers began to melt. Not to melt, but specifically to melt, to be absorbed into his palm like water into a dry sponge. The reactor was running at full capacity. The status window was flooded with notifications. Absorption of foreign structure. Conversion. Essence plus 8,000, plus 8,000, plus 8,000. Every second. The wall was being drawn into his hand, and in return, his body was filling with a power that made his teeth chatter. His internal temperature crept upward. 33.8, 34.0, 34.5, 35.0. For the first time ever, the reactor wasn't drawing heat away, but giving it back. Compatible material required no payment. It gave. The wall dissolved in a minute. Behind it, a cavity opened up. A cave. He couldn't tell if it was natural or not. 3 meters high, 5 meters wide. The walls were made of the same alien material, and they all glowed blue. In the center lay a creature, an ice serpent. Rings as thick as a barrel, a head flat as a shovel. Its scales shimmered with shades of white and blue. The system issued a tag. Ice Guardian of the Shard, rank A+, 130,000 OP. Special trait, bound to the zone, does not leave the cave. Sleep mode. The serpent slept. Jian stood 3 meters away from a creature that could kill him with a single flick of its tail. 180,000 OP against 130,000 looked like an advantage, but his HP was synthetic. No combat skill, no weapons, no equipment. He was an accountant with a warrior stats. The numbers lied. In a direct fight, the snake would tear him apart before he could even lift a rock. The golem descended into the pit, stood nearby. 28,500 HP. The two of them, 208,500 OP on paper. The snake didn't move. Even breathing raised and lowered the rings. Jian looked at it and thought, not about how to kill it, about what would come next. An A+ rank core, 130,000 OP in pure essence, plus a corpse. Corpse plus snow plus blood equals a golem. A golem with 30% of 130,000. That's 39,000 OP. Stronger than the first Guardian. And the cave. Walls made of puncture material. A compatible resource. No penalty for synthesis. This isn't a fight. It's an investment. He gave the golem a mental command. Attack. The Guardian leaped. Its jaws snapped shut around the snake's neck. Icy fangs pierced the scales, and blue blood gushed onto the stone. The snake awoke. Instantly, the tail lashed out like a whip, and the golem was flung against the wall. A crack ran across its icy body from head to spine. One blow, one crack. Two more, and the golem would crumble. The serpent turned toward Jiyun, eyes with vertical pupils. Cold. Ancient. Its mouth opened and a stream of icy air burst out. Not fire. Anti-fire. The temperature in the cave dropped 10 degrees per second, minus 75. June didn't run. He did what he did best. He calculated. The snake is tethered to the cave. It won't get out. The golem is damaged but functional. The wound on the snake's neck is bleeding. The blood of an A+ rank monster is an ingredient. He didn't rush toward the snake. He rushed toward the pool of blue blood on the floor. He scooped up as much as he could in his palm. An icy wind lashed at his back. The skin on his neck burned with cold. He tossed the blood into an inventory slot. A stone from the cave wall went in there too. Compatible materials, 0% failure rate, instant synthesis, success. The blade of empty resonance, rank A, type melee, special feature, ignores the target's cold resistance. A sword materialized in his hand, short, 40 centimeters of blade, gray with blue streaks, the same material as the walls. The snake struck with its tail. Jiyun went down. Not a fighter's dodge, but the fall of a man who knew he wouldn't have time to get back otherwise. The tail passed over his head. The golem sank its teeth into the snake's neck again, a distraction. Half a second. June struck with the blade from bottom to top. The blade entered the snake's lower jaw and passed right through. Ignoring the cold's resistance meant that the icy monster's scales were no harder than paper to this blade. The snake twitched. It opened its mouth wide. It wanted to breathe out once more. June twisted the blade. The blade cut through something inside. Something important. The snake went limp. Its coils relaxed. The body fell to the cave floor with a hollow, wet thud. Silence. Only the crackling of ice in the walls and June's ragged breathing. System. A-rank monster destroyed. Core obtained. Essence plus 8,000. Total OU count 310,000. Internal temperature 36.1. The cave walls lifted him back up. He stood over the snake's body and looked at the blade of empty resonance in his hand. His first real weapon in 10 hours. He ran his finger along the blade. Gray veins glowed in time with his pulse. Then he looked at the cave. The walls, the ceiling, the space. Shelter from the wind. Compatible material for free syntheses. A place where the reactor operated without penalty. He realized he had found more than just a refuge. He had found a foundation. Here he would build a citadel. The golem stood by the wall. The crack in its body was slowly closing. Self-repair. Another property June hadn't known about. He placed the snake's corpse in a cell, added snow from the floor. A drop of his own blood. Synthesis. Success. A second golem rose from the snow, larger than the first, heavier, an icy serpent of white ice. 39,000 HP. June stood in a cave 4 meters deep beneath the frozen wasteland. One man, 2 golems, 310,000 HP. A blade in his hand. Day 1 was over. 3 hours until morning. And in the Han clan's bunker, a night shift technician noticed something odd on a satellite image of the northern quadrant. A small heat signature, where nothing living should be. He noted it in the log as an anomaly and went to get some coffee. By morning, the spot had become twice as bright. By the morning of the second day, the outside temperature had dropped to minus 68. June hadn't slept. He sat in the cave and worked. The walls yielded compatible material without penalty, and he used every minute. A shard of the wall, plus the blue blood of a snake from a puddle on the floor. Synthesis. Icy membrane. Rank B. Applies to the body. Reduces heat loss by 70%. Duration, 12 hours. He applied the membrane and, for the first time that day, didn't feel the frost gnawing at his skin through his jacket. A shard of the wall plus a snake's tooth pried from its jaw. Synthesis. Shard thread. Rank A. Building material. 8 times stronger than steel. Does not conduct cold. 1 thread, meter long. Thinner than a hair. But if you put 10 strands together and weave them, he synthesized 9 more. 10 strands. Wove them. It turned into a rope. A rope made of a material that didn't exist on Earth before the puncture. He looked at the cave ceiling, at the walls, at the floor, and began to build. Not with his hands, with the reactor. He placed fragments of the wall into the cells. He produced threads. He wove. He reinforced. He expanded. The golems dug. The first golem dug tunnels upward for ventilation. The second expanded the cave by gnawing into the rock. Jian coordinated and synthesized. By noon, the cave had doubled in size. By evening, it had tripled. Each synthesis from compatible material did not affect the internal temperature. The system seemed to acknowledge that he had a right to this resource, that he and the resource were of the same origin. By the end of the second day, his HP had risen to 350,000, not from combat, from the sheer absorption of the walls. Each block of compatible material yielded 2,000 essences. The walls seemed endless. The deeper the golems dug, the more compatible rock was revealed. On the third morning, he emerged to the surface for the first time in 30 hours, -70. The wind knocked him off his feet. He activated the crimson lens. A red filter settled over the world, and the wasteland blossomed with dots once more. But now there were more of them, far more. The cold was driving the monsters south, toward the warmth, toward his warmth. 14 dots within a 200-meter radius. 3 of them were large, A rank. He smiled, not happily, calculatingly. 14 monsters meant 14 corpses. 14 corpses meant 14 golems. Or 14 artifact synths. Or a combination of both. The wasteland was delivering raw materials to him on its own. He descended back down and led the golems out on the hunt. The first golem took down 3 ice rats in a minute. The second strangled a C-rank ice fox with its rings. Jiyun finished off the wounded with the blade. The blade cut through the ice monsters like water. By the evening of the third day, the tally stood as follows: 80,000 OU, 8 fresh cores, 14 corpses. He synthesized 4 new golems, 6 guards, 2 wolves, 1 snake, and 3 rat golems, small but fast. An army of 6 ice creatures patrolling the perimeter of the growing citadel. He spent 8 cores on artifacts. The Cloak of the Icy Veil, rank A. It replaced his tattered gray jacket. It looked like a white officer's cloak with gray threads along the edge, the same material as the piercer. It didn't let the cold through. It didn't get wet, didn't tear. Bracers of Empty Resonance, rank A, a pair. Enhanced golem control. The control radius increased from 50 meters to 300. Boots of the Frozen Path, rank B. Traction on any surface. His feet stopped slipping and sinking. A small thing, but a small thing that saved energy every second. The remains of the cores and corpses were used to reinforce the walls. By the third day, the citadel looked like this. An underground base 4 meters deep. A central hall carved from the original cave. 4 tunnels leading to the cardinal directions. Ventilation to the surface through 3 shafts. Walls reinforced with shard threads. A single entrance, narrow, guarded constantly by 2 golems. Outside, nothing. A white plain. Not a single landmark. Only a heat signature on the satellite images that grew by the hour. On the 4th day, people arrived. Jiyun heard them before he saw them. Shouts, distant, torn to shreds by the wind. He climbed to the surface. 700 meters to the southeast, figures were trudging through the snow. 5. No, 7. They were falling, getting up, falling again. 2 of them had no outer clothing. One was carrying someone small on his back. He activated the lens, not for nuclei, for thermal signatures. People, all 7 of them, weak, low-ranking hunters, the strongest no higher than C-class. He stood in the wind and watched them fall. He could have stayed inside, could have sealed the entrance and waited for the blizzard to bury them. They weren't his people, not his responsibility, not his problem. Then a small figure on the back of one of them raised her head, and Jiyun saw her face. A girl, 13 years old, or so. Dark hair matted with snow, eyes closed, lips blue. He sent the golems. 3 guards reached the group within a minute. The people screamed. Someone fell to their knees. They thought the monsters had come to finish them off. The wolf golem grabbed the girl by her jacket with its teeth and carried her toward the citadel. The other guards surrounded the group and herded them in the right direction, like sheepdogs herding a flock. 10 minutes later, all seven were lying in the central hall of the cave, alive. Barely. The girl opened her eyes. She looked at Jiun, at the white cloak, at the blade at his hip, at the golems by the walls. She said one word, Oppa, and lost consciousness. Han Min-soo, cousin, 13 years old, archivist skill, rank B, perfect memory for numbers and structures, the last person from the Han clan who never betrayed it. She was thrown out of the bunker along with 6 other heirs of the lesser clans, unwanted, inconvenient, those whom the Council of Seven Towers ordered to be eliminated. The man carrying her on his back introduced himself as Park Song-ho, 34 years old, former A-rank hunter, skill, steel skin. He was expelled from his own tower for refusing to transfer his skill to another heir. Same pattern, same contract, the same council pulling the strings behind the scenes. Song-ho looked at Jiun and asked who he was. Jiun didn't answer. He looked at the 12 people who were now his responsibility. 7 from the plains, plus 5 whom the golems dragged in over the next 2 hours. 12 outcasts, hungry, frostbitten, weak. And every single one with skills the council deemed not useful enough to keep in the warmth. Min-soo woke up an hour later. She was lying on the floor wrapped in a membrane Jiun had synthesized specifically for her. She looked at him and said she knew what had happened, that Jisoo had declared him dead, that in the bunker they'd held a memorial service and Eden had cried on camera. She cried beautifully, like an actress. Jiun listened. His expression didn't change. Then he asked one thing. What was Jisoo's number for today? Min-soo answered instantly. The archivist remembered everything. 1,980,000 OU. No change. It isn't growing. A stolen skill doesn't develop in a new host because the contract copied the power but didn't copy the skill's connection to the body. Jisoo was standing still. In 3 days, Ji-un had gone from 0 to 80,000 OU, and the pace was only accelerating. He looked at Min-soo, at Sonho, at the 15 faces staring at him from the darkness of the cave. He said he needed a list. The names of those who decided to cast them out. The names of those who carried it out. The names of those who knew and did not intervene. Min-soo sat down. Her eyes flashed. The archivist awoke within her like a program receiving a command. She began to dictate. Names, titles, positions, tower numbers, connections, patrons. Ji-un listened, memorized. The list grew. And at the headquarters of the United Towers Guild, night shift analyst Cho Do-hyun sat in front of the screen, staring at a thermal spot in the northern quadrant that had quadrupled in size over the past 3 days. He requested a detailed scan. The satellite zoomed in. The resolution was maxed out. In the image, a structure was clearly visible against the white field. Not natural, geometric, with right angles, with ventilation shafts, with moving objects around the perimeter. Do-hyun leaned back in his chair, rubbed his eyes, looked again. Then he took out his personal tablet, not his work one, his personal one, and he saved the image to a folder that no one but him could see. In the wasteland at minus 70 degrees, someone was building a fortress. And Do-hyun had only one question to which he didn't want to know the answer. Who? On the 7th day, Park Song-ho entered the central hall and saw something that made his knees buckle. 14 golems stood in 2 rows along the walls. Wolves, snakes, 3 new forms he hadn't seen before. Bears. Ice bears, assembled from the corpses of 2 A-rank beasts that the guards had dragged in during the night. Each bear carried 42,000 OU. Each wolf, 28,500. The snakes, 39,000. The formation's total power exceeded 500,000 OU. Song-ho had been fighting for 12 years. He had seen clan armies, tower parades, punitive corps formations, but he had never seen a single man assemble a force in 7 days capable of razing the garrison of a medium-sized tower to the ground. He asked Jun what his number was. Jun answered without turning around. 350,000. Sung-ho remained silent. Then he sat down on a rock and asked a second question. Who are you? Jun turned around. He looked at Sono, at his hands covered in old scars, at his steel skin skill, which gleamed with a gray sheen even when relaxed. Sono was a warrior, a real one. Not a politician with numbers, but a man who stood in the front line and never retreated. People like that are needed. Jun gave his name, his full name, Han Jiun, former number 3 in the world rankings, former heir to the Han clan. Sonho dropped the flask. Water spilled onto the stone. He didn't notice. He looked at Jiun as if he were already dead, because according to every newsfeed, Han Jiun had been dead for a week. Memorial ceremony, mourning ribbons, Jisu's speech to the camera, with tears glistening just enough for a good shot. And now the dead man stood before him in a white cloak made of a material that didn't exist on Earth, with a blade at his hip, with 14 golems behind him, with a figure of 350,000 OU that had been 0 a week ago. Sono stood up. He straightened himself. He bowed, not like a subordinate, like a soldier who had seen his commander. He said that his skill and his life belonged to the one who had pulled them out of the snow, and that if Jiun ordered him to go to the walls of the Han Tower, he would go first. Jiun shook his head. He said that the walls would have to wait. First the citadel, then the numbers, then the list, in that order. Construction picked up speed. Sonho took charge of organizing the 12 exiles. Among them were 2 with useful skills. Kang Yuri, 27 years old, skill, thermal shield, rank C. Created a dome of heat with a 5-meter radius. Weak by combat standards, but in the wasteland at -7, it was an S-rank skill. She kept the sleeping area warm while the others rested. The second, No Tae-hyun, 21 years old, skill, echo scanner, rank D. An ultrasonic map of the terrain, radius 300 meters. He could see through snow and rock. Useless in the city, indispensable in the wasteland. Taehyun scanned the underground voids. It turned out there was more than one cave made of puncture material. A whole network was hidden beneath the plain. Cavities, tunnels, halls, as if something were growing underground like the root system of a giant tree, and all of it made of compatible material. A free resource. Endless growth. Jiun stood over the map Taehyun had drawn on the floor with charcoal and calculated. If each block of compatible material yielded 2,000 essences, and if the underground network stretched for kilometers, then there were no limits. There was no ceiling. The reactor could grow indefinitely as long as there was enough compatible rock. He began to systematically consume the walls, not gnawing out chunks, but removing layer by layer, expanding the rooms, reinforcing the load-bearing structures with shard threads, turning the damp cave into a fortress. By the end of the 7th day, the OU reached the mark and the system updated the status. 350,000, rank B, 14 golems, a blade, a full set of artifact equipment, 12 people under protection, and a foundation that went deeper into the ground than any of the Khan clan's bunkers. That same night, Minsu brought news. She hadn't slept. She never truly slept because the archivist worked around the clock. Her brain sorted data even in her sleep. She connected to a fragment of the guild network signal via a transmitter that Sonho had assembled from the wreckage of the exiles' equipment. The signal was weak. One way, receive only. But that was enough. The tower's newsfeed. Top headline: Han Ji-soo appointed commander of the Southern Defense Line, approved unanimously by the Council of the Seven Towers. A photo beside it: Ji-soo in the new heir's cloak. Next to him, So Edin in a communications officer's uniform. Behind them, So Tae-won, guild chairman, Edin's father, the man who planned it all. Minsu read it aloud. Her voice was steady, emotionless, like a news anchor. Taewon gave a speech about unity in the face of adversity, about how the younger generation is taking responsibility, about how the Han clan had always been the backbone of the nation. Jiun listened, standing by the wall, hands behind his back, his face calm. When Minsu finished, he said nothing about Taewon, nothing about Jisoo, nothing about Edin. He asked one thing: what were the numbers for the southern frontier? Minsu answered, 2,400 hunters, average rank B. Total power, according to the guild, approximately 4,800,000 OP. Patrol groups of 40 people, A rank officers in each. Area of responsibility from Seoul to the coast, including the square area, including the wasteland, including the heat signature on the satellite image. Jiun nodded. So they're coming. It's not a question of when, it's a question of what force they'll bring. He turned to Sunho, said he needed a defense plan. Sunho took out a stone and began sketching on the floor. Lines, arcs, positions. 12 years of combat experience poured onto the stone in 20 minutes. 14 golems arranged in 3 rings. The outer ring, wolves, fast, mobile. Their task is not to kill, but to slow down and disorient. The middle ring, snakes and bears, heavy hitters. Their task was to wear down the main group. The inner ring, Jiun alone, with a blade. The final line that no one was supposed to reach. But if they did... Sunho looked at Jiun. He smirked. If they do reach it, they won't like what they find there. The next 7 days fell into a rhythm. In the morning, Taehyun scanned. In the afternoon, the golems hunted. In the evening, Jiun synthesized. At night, Minsu monitored the network. The OU grew. 400,000, 500,000, 600,000. Every day, new corpses. Every corpse, a new golem or a new artifact. Every artifact, another layer of armor on the citadel. On the 10th day, Jiun created the first Archon. Not from a rat, not from a wolf. From the corpse of an S-rank ice giant that a pack of golems had driven into a ravine and torn apart for 3 hours. The giant was enormous, 4 meters tall, arms like columns, a core worth 50,000 essences. The giant's corpse, snow, Jiun's blood. 3 ingredients. Synthesis. The status window flashed gold. Success. Archon of Eternal Ice, Class SS, installed 30% of combat power, base rating 150,000 OP, autonomous thinking, capable of executing complex commands. Something rose from the snow, causing Sunho to take 3 steps back and Minsu to cover her mouth with her hand. 4 meters of icy stone and blue veins, a head without a face. Only 2 blue lights where the eyes should be. The hands ended not in fists, but in blades, each a meter long. 150,000 OU. A single Archon was worth 3 patrol groups of the southern frontier. It stood at the citadel gates. It didn't move. It didn't breathe. Waiting. On the 12th day, the total OU count exceeded 700,000. And Minsu intercepted the first mention of the wasteland in the Frontier's operational reports. Patrol Group Number 7 reported strange tracks in the northern sector. The tracks did not belong to any known monster, too even, too geometric, as if a vehicle had driven through the snow, which didn't exist in the wasteland. The Frontier Command requested detailed images from the guild. Taekwon personally approved the request. The satellite locked onto the northern quadrant, maximum resolution, and Choi Do-hyun, sitting at the console, saw that made him spill his coffee for the second time that week. In the image, in the center of the white wasteland stood a fortress. Not a cave, not a burrow, a fortress, with towers of ice stone, with gates, with moving figures on the walls, with a structure that matched no architectural template in the guild's database. Do-hyun switched the scanner to threat assessment mode. Numbers raced across the screen. He stared at them. He checked the calibration, checked again, a third time, a fourth. The numbers didn't change. Total object assessment, 1,200,000 OU. In a wasteland where nothing living should exist, someone had built a fortress with combat potential equal to that of a mid-tier clan. Do-hyun saved the screenshot to his personal folder. He closed the work file, and for the first time in 20 years of service, he didn't include the data in the official report. Instead of the actual figure, he entered 120,000. An anomalous cluster of ice monsters. Recommendation: send a patrol group to clear the area. Not a battalion, a group. 40 men. He didn't know who was out there, but he knew that if the council saw the real number, it wouldn't be a team, but an army sent into the wasteland. And whoever was out there wouldn't stand a chance. Do-hyun gave him a chance. 1. And on the walls of the citadel, Jiun stood and looked south, a blade at his hip, his cloak fluttering in the wind. Behind him, the Archon and 14 guards. Beneath his feet lay the fortress, growing by the hour. 700,000 OU. And he knew that soon those who wanted to find out where the heat in the dead zone had come from would arrive. He was waiting for them. Minsu's list lay in his pocket. Names, ranks, positions. Every officer of the frontier carried an encrypted order. Every order contained one more name, one more thread leading to the council. He didn't need to go to them. They were coming to him. All that remained was to count. The patrol arrived on the 14th day. 40 A-rank hunters in full winter gear, white body armor with the guild's crest, thermal generators on their belts. Each fighter had between 100,000 and 130,000 OP. The group's total power was approximately 4,500,000. The commander, an officer named Jaeon Il-han, 140,000 OP, a veteran of mop-up operations, 12 years in the punitive corps. He walked ahead, carrying an encrypted order from the Frontier Command in his breast pocket, signed by Han Ji-soo. Il-han was the first to see the citadel. He stopped, raised his binoculars. Icy walls, towers, gates, figures on the walls. He lowered his binoculars and cursed, because the briefing had mentioned a cluster of ice monsters, not a fortress, not gates, not a figure in a white cloak on the upper wall who was staring straight at him from a distance of 800 meters. Il-han activated the scanner, standard guild equipment. He aimed it at the figure. He expected the usual numbers. E rank, maybe D. An anomalous monster. Nothing serious. The scanner displayed the result, 900,000 OU. Il-han looked at the number. He looked at his men. 40 fighters, 4,500,000 total. But that was the total. And 900,000 in a single spot was a level none of them could reach on their own. He pointed the scanner at the walls. Figures. Golems. The system counted each one. 28,000, 39,000, 42,000, 150,000. Il-han paused at the last number. 150,000. Archon. A single figure on the wall that was worth more than he was. He contacted the Frontier, reported. His voice was steady, professional. The target does not match the briefing. A man-made fortress. Defensive structures of unknown type. Multiple combat units. A central figure. 900,000 OU. Recommendation: retreat and request reinforcements. The line was silent for 7 seconds. Then Jisoo's voice, clear, calm, even cheerful. He said it was impossible, that there were no people in the northern quadrant, that 900,000 was a scanner error, that the group must conduct a sweep as ordered and return with samples. Ilkhan tried to object. Jisoo repeated the order, in the same tone, with the same voice. But at the end, he added that failure to follow orders under apocalypse conditions would be classified as desertion, punishment, demotion, expulsion from the tower. For their families, too. Ilkhan cut the connection. He looked at his men, 40 faces beneath white helmets. Each had a family in the bunker. Each had a name on the tower's wall. He gave the order to advance. They marched 800 meters across the open plain. The wind lashed their faces. -72. The heat generators on their belts hummed at full capacity. At 500 meters, the outer defense ring activated. 6 wolves emerged from behind the snowdrifts simultaneously, white on white, invisible until the last second. They didn't attack. They ran around the column in a circle, narrowing it. The patrol reformed into a defensive diamond. 12 fighters on the outer perimeter activated their combat skills. Ice, steel, fire. Multicolored flashes in the white blizzard. A wolf leaped. The nearest fighter struck with a skill. A C-rank ice arrow passed through the golem and exited its back. The hole closed in a second. The ice golem in the frozen wasteland regenerated instantly because there was an endless supply of building material all around. Ilkhan was the first to realize this. His face went pale. He shouted for a reposition. Too late. The middle ring had engaged. The serpent struck from beneath the snow. It emerged like a torpedo. It closed the rings around the 5 fighters on the left flank. The crunch of armor. Screams. The bear crashed into the right flank. Its paw swept away 3 of them. They flew through the snow like dolls. The body armor held, but the bones beneath it didn't. Ilkhan struck with skill. A-rank cleaving blade. A good skill. Powerful. He sliced the wolf in half. The 2 halves fell into the snow, and 3 seconds later, a new wolf rose from each. Smaller, weaker, but alive. He sliced the golem and got 2. Panic. Not immediately. The professionals held their ground. But when the 3rd snake rose from beneath their feet, and the bear, which had been incinerated by a fire skill, simply reassembled itself from the snow, when they realized that the ice golems in the icy wasteland were impossible to kill, then panic. 12 minutes. That's how long the battle lasted. Not 7 minutes, as it would be in the finale. 12. Because 40 A-rank fighters are a formidable force, and the golems lost their form again and again. But they kept coming back. The people didn't. By the end of the 12th minute, 23 hunters were lying in the snow, alive, not a single corpse. June had ordered them not to kill. The golems broke arms, legs, ribs, crushed weapons, put them out of commission, but they didn't kill. The remaining 17 stood in a tight circle, back to back, Ilkhan in the center, skill activated. The blade hummed in the air. He waited for the final attack. Instead, the line of golems parted, a corridor in the white ranks, and down the corridor walked a man in a white cloak. Alone, no golems by his side. A blade at his hip, but not in his hand. Ilkhan watched him, and the scanner on his belt beeped incessantly. 900,000 OU. The man stopped 10 meters away. 17 A-rank hunters were watching him. He was looking at Ilkhan, and Ilkhan saw his face. Young, 26 years old, black hair, a scar on his neck, thin, like a needle prick. Ilhan knew that face. Every hunter in Korea knew that face. It had hung on the memorial wall of the Han clan's bunker 2 weeks ago. Ilhan whispered the name. Han Ji-un, the dead heir. 17 hunters heard it. 17 helmets turned. 17 scanners locked onto one person. 900,000 OU. 900,000 OU. 900,000 OU. The same number on every screen. The man they had buried 2 weeks ago stood before them with a number that was 1.5 times higher than any A-rank fighter in the world. Ji-un didn't say much. He asked Ilhan if he had the order with him. Ilhan pulled it out, an encrypted file on a card. Jun took it, put it in his pocket. Then he asked a second question. Were there any among the wounded who needed help? Ilhan didn't answer. He stood there looking at the dead man, and in his eyes a picture slowly took shape that he didn't want to see. The SSS heir who had been declared dead. The brother who had taken his place. The fiancé who had gone over to his brother. And the number 900,000, which had sprung up out of nowhere in the icy wasteland. He understood. Not everything, but enough. Ilhan lowered his blade, deactivated the skill, stood up straight, and said that he had 23 wounded and that they wouldn't make it to the frontier without help. Ji-un nodded. The golems picked up the wounded and carried them to the citadel. 23 hunters received first aid, membranes, warmth, food that Ji-un had learned to synthesize on the 5th day from monster meat and ice roots. Tasteless, but high in calories. Ilhan sat against the wall and watched as the golems bandaged his men. Then he looked at Ji-un, then at the map of the order that Ji-un had already deciphered with Min-Su's help. The archivist cracked the code in 4 minutes. Inside were names, the chain of command, Ilhan, his deputies, the border coordinators, and a signature, Han Ji-soo, commander of the Southern Defensive Border. On behalf of Chairman So Tae-won, another name on the list, another thread leading to the council. Ji-un put the map away. He looked at Ilhan. Ilhan was waiting for an order, an ultimatum, demands. Ji-un said one thing. When your men are back on their feet, they are free to leave. Everyone, including you. The road south is open. Ilhan looked at him for a long time. Then he asked, "What if we don't leave?" Ji-un didn't smile, but something in his eyes shifted by a fraction of a degree. He replied that then Sonyo would explain to them where to stand. And at the guild headquarters, Che Do-hyun stared at the red marker for the lost patrol and felt the coffee grow cold in his hand for the 4th time this week. Of the 17 combat-ready hunters, 4 had left. 13 remained, plus 9 of the 23 wounded who had gotten back on their feet in 3 days and asked to rejoin the ranks. 22 A-rank hunters under Ilhan's command, plus 12 outcasts, plus Songho, plus Min-Su, plus 26 golems, including the Archon. The citadel in the lone hunter's burrow had turned into a garrison. Jun stood on the wall and counted. Not people, time. The 4 who had left would reach the frontier in 3 days. Another day for the report. Another day for a decision. 5 days. In 5 days, Jisoo will learn that his patrol wasn't destroyed, but defected to the dead man's side. And then he wouldn't send a group. 5 days to prepare. He went downstairs and got to work. By this point, the OU stood at 900,000, and every day he added between 50 and 70,000. The underground network of compatible material seemed endless. Taehyun scanned every morning and found new cavities every morning. New halls, new resources. Jiun absorbed them methodically, layer by layer, hall by hall. On the 15th day, he surpassed 1 million. 1 million OU rank A. The system issued a notification he hadn't expected. Rank A threshold reached. Reactor function unlocked. Mass synthesis. Ability to perform synthesis on multiple cells simultaneously. Up until this point, each synthesis had been done one at a time. A corpse plus ice. Wait. Result. Next. Now he could load 10 cells and run all 10 at once. The growth rate increased tenfold. On the 16th day, 1,100,000. On the 17th, 1,250,000. On the 18th, 1,400,000. There were now 40 golems, 2 archons, 40 guards. The citadel was encircled by an outer wall of S-rank eternal ice, a material that did not melt, did not crack, did not yield to skills below A rank. Walls 7 meters high, 2 meters thick, with towers at the corners, with gates that the Archon closed with a single wave of his hand. Ilhan trained the men. Sonho coordinated the golems. Minsu decrypted every scrap of data from the guild network. On the 19th day, she intercepted a message that changed everything. An encrypted frequency. So Taewan's private channel. The archivist cracked the code in an hour. Taewan gave the order to Jisoo. Not a patrol, not a squad. The punitive corps. Full strength, 400 hunters, 30 A-rank officers, 3 S-class generals. Total power, 8 million OU. Objective: complete destruction of the anomalous object in the northern quadrant. Special directive: leave no survivors, including civilians. Minsu read the last line, and her voice faltered for the first time in all these days. Leave no survivors. 12 outcasts. Children from the lesser clans. Women, the elderly. Teal'c knew they were there. The satellite showed thermal signatures. He knew and gave the order. Jiun took the tablet from Minsu's hands. He read it himself. His expression didn't change. He returned the tablet and turned to Sunho. He said they had 3 days. Sunho didn't ask what for. He knew. 3 days to turn the fortress into a trap. Everyone worked, around the clock. Ilhan and his men dug outer trenches, camouflaged pits, false passages, each trap reinforced with shards of eternal ice that in the cold became sharper than any blade. Sonho was redesigning the golem formation. Not 3 rings, 5, with cutoff positions, with corridors for a false retreat, a luring tactic. Let the enemy in, then shut the doors. Jian synthesized non-stop. Mass synthesis devoured resources, but the underground network provided more than he could process. New golems rose every hour, 40, 50, 60, 70. By the 20th day, there were 80. By the 21st, 100. The count had surpassed 1,800,000. He was approaching the figure of the stolen skill. Minsu counted along with him. She knew his previous figure, 2,040,000. She knew Jisoo's figure, 1,980,000. She knew the difference. And every evening she reported the current score like a game scoreboard. 1,800,000 against 1,980,000. A gap of 180,000. Tomorrow it would be smaller. Liu Chai-hong arrived on the 22nd day. She came alone, without guards, without equipment, in a lab coat over a winter jacket. She was brought in by a scout golem that found her 3 kilometers from the citadel. She was lying unconscious in the snow, 3rd degree frostbite. Body temperature, 31 degrees. Another hour, and she would have died. Jian synthesized an ice heart for her, then a second one, then a membrane. She woke up 4 hours later, opened her eyes, saw the cave walls, the golems, Jian. And the first thing she said made him stop. She said she knew what his inventory was. Silence filled the hall. Everyone was looking at her. Kai Hong sat down, She coughed, blood on her lips from frostbite in her lungs. But she spoke clearly. She had been an alchemist in Lin Wei's laboratory in Beijing, an S-rank skill, the resonance formula, the only skill in the world capable of theoretically predicting the outcome of matter conversion. She had studied the shards of the puncture for 6 years. She knew that the converter function existed. She knew that bearers of core fragments could transform matter, and she knew they would come for June, not only because he was building a fortress in the wasteland, but because the Council of Seven Towers consists of the 7 core fragment bearers, and they need all the fragments for synchronization. June listened in silence, hands behind his back. His face was impassive. Kai Hong continued, "The ice apocalypse is not a natural phenomenon. It is terraforming, the transformation of Earth into a world on the other side of the breach. To complete it, 7 converters working in sync are needed. Tech One thought he controlled all 7. He didn't know there was an 8th. June's fragment. A shard from the schoolyard. An error. An anomaly. A variable that shouldn't exist. If Jiyun survives until the moment of synchronization, the process will fail. Earth will remain Earth." She fell silent. The room fell silent. Minsu pressed the tablet to her chest. Sonho stood by the wall with his fists clenched. Ilhan stared at the floor. Jiyun remained silent the longest. Then he asked one thing. She said that her skill allowed her to calculate syntheses in advance, to reduce the risk, to eliminate hypothermia as a factor. He asked if she could prove it. Chai Hong looked at the nearest inventory slot, at the shard of stone and the corpse of an ice rat lying nearby, ready for synthesis. She closed her eyes. The resonance formula activated. The air around her trembled. She opened her eyes and announced the result. Icy Heart of Immortality, rank A, plus 12,000 OP. Success rate 100%. Temperature loss 0.18 degrees. Not 0.2 as usual, 0.18. Jaeon tossed the ingredients into the slot. Synthesis, Icy Heart, rank A, 12,000 OP. Temperature minus 0.18, just as she said. He looked at Sai Hong. She was looking at him. No warmth in her eyes, no gratitude for being saved. Professional interest, cold calculation. She didn't come because she had nowhere else to go. She came because he was the only research subject worthy of her skill. Jiyun understood that, and that suited him better than loyalty. Loyalty can be faked. Professional interest cannot. He told her she needed a place in the citadel, a workspace, access to inventory, access to resources. In return, every synthesis goes through her calculations. Every role is optimized. Every risk is calculated. Tsai Hong nodded. A deal without handshakes. 2 professionals who need each other. On the 23rd day, with Tsai Hong at the helm of the synths, OU Jiyun's output jumped to 150,000 in a single day instead of the usual 50,000. She saw formulas he hadn't seen, combinations that yielded 30% more essence with less heat expenditure. On the 24th day, 2,100,000. Jiyun exceeded the value of the stolen skill, 2,100,000 versus Jisu's 1,980,000. He stood on the wall and looked at the number in status window. Behind him, 120 golems, 2 archons, a citadel of eternal ice, a garrison of 35 fighters, an S-rank alchemist, a list of names in his pocket, and the core marching toward him across the white wasteland. 400 hunters, 30 A-rank officers, 3 S-class generals. Minsu approached. She stood beside him. She looked at his number, 2,100,000. She looked at him, and said that Eden was seeing the same thing on the screen in the bunker right now. Because the guild network was updating the rankings in real time, and for the first time in 2 weeks, a name that shouldn't have been there had appeared in the rankings. Han Ji-woon, 2,100,000. Number unknown. Status unconfirmed. But the number stood next to Jisoo's number, on the same screen, on the same display. And Ji-woon knew that right now, in the bunker's dining hall, Eden was looking at that screen, and the cup in her hand was trembling. The hull appeared on the horizon on the 26th day, a black line against a white field, 400 people in battle formation, armored vehicles in front, 6 transport vehicles, 2 mobile command posts, a jammer that blocked communications within a 5-kilometer radius. Minsu lost the guild network signal the moment the jammer activated. She reported to Jiun. He nodded, as expected. Taehyun stood on the wall and scanned. His echo scanner operated on a different frequency and was unaffected by the interference. He counted aloud. 412 fighters, 32 A-rank officers, 3 generals. First General, Kwon Daesok, skill, Rift, S-rank. 620,000 OP. Specialization, Fortification Destruction. He was brought in to tear down the walls. Second General, Yu Sung-min, skill, Bloody Chain, S-rank. 580,000 OP. Specialization, Suppressing Multiple Targets. He was brought in for the golems. Third General, Nam Gyun, skill, Thermal Spear, S-rank. 550,000 OP. Specialization, Piercing Ice Defenses. He was brought in specifically for Jiun. Total core power, 8,200,000 OP. Against Jiun's 2,100,000 OP. And the combined 1.5 million OP of his golems and garrison. A 3-fold advantage. On paper. Jiun stood on the wall and looked at the black line. Sunho was beside him. Ilhan, Kaihong was slightly behind, holding a tablet displaying scrolling formulas. Minsu stood at his elbow with a closed communications tablet. Sunho asked for the plan. Jiun answered with a single word. Wait. The Corps had stopped a kilometer away. Set up camp, tents, heat generators, searchlights. They were in no hurry. 400 men against a fortress in the wasteland. They thought time was on their side. On the second day of the standoff, the Corps sent out a negotiator, a single man on the open plain, a white flag, an A-rank officer. He approached the walls to within 50 meters and shouted that General Kwon Daesok was offering to surrender. All inhabitants of the fortress would be taken to the towers and tried according to guild law. Resistance meant annihilation. Jiun did not come out. No response. The Archon on the wall turned his head toward the negotiator. 2 blue lights stared down at him from a height of 7 meters. The negotiator turned and walked away at a brisk pace, too fast for a man carrying a white flag. On the third day of the standoff, the Corps attacked, the 28th day since the betrayal. Minus 75 degrees outside the walls. Kwon Daesok struck first. Rift, an S-rank skill. The ground in front of the citadel cracked. The crack spread toward the wall, wide, deep, as if an invisible knife had sliced open the plain. The crack reached the wall, and the eternal ice held. An S-rank skill against S-rank material. A draw. Kwon struck again, and again. The third blow left a dent. The fourth, a crack. The fifth, the wall collapsed. A 10-meter wide section caved in, and the Corps surged through the breach. The first wave, 100 fighters. A-rank officers at the forefront. Skills blazed through the blizzard like colored lightning. They entered the breach and found themselves in a corridor. Narrow, long. Walls of eternal ice on both sides. Nothing overhead. Open sky. But the walls were narrowing. A trap. Sonho had designed it on the fifth day of training. A false breach. A wall that was supposed to collapse because it had been deliberately weakened. Behind it, a corridor that led not to the citadel, but to a dead end. 100 fighters were drawn into the corridor, and the walls closed in. Not physically. Golems. 20 guards rose from the snow on both sides and sealed the exit. 20 from the other end sealed the entrance. 100 fighters in an icy box. Panic. Screams. Skills strike the walls. The walls hold. S-rank Eternal Ice wouldn't yield to anything below S-rank, and there were no S-rank fighters among the 100. The generals remained outside. The second wave. 200 fighters. Yu San-min at the head. The bloody chain activated. Red threads burst from his hands and reached toward the golems on the walls. The threads entwined, squeezed, torn apart. 3 golems crumbled. 5. 7. San-min tore them apart faster than they could regenerate. His skill was designed to fight multiple targets, and against a swarm of golems, it worked like a lawnmower on grass. Jian watched from the second wall, the inner one. He counted. San-min was destroying 3 golems a minute. They regenerated in 30 seconds. But the regenerated ones were weaker. The 5th, the 10th cycle, and only 15% of the golem remained, not 30. 10. San-min was winning. Slowly, but he was winning. Jiun turned to Kai Hong. She was already calculating. The resonance formula glowed around her hands in a pale gold. She named the combination. The core of an ice giant plus the blood of an S-class general. Result. Chainbreaker. Rank S. Counterskill. Neutralizes control-type binding. The blood of an S-class general. Jiun didn't have San-min's blood, but he had something else. An order from Ilhan's breast pocket. A card signed by Jisoo with a fingerprint. DNA on the surface. Caihong looked at him. He looked at her. She understood. The DNA on the card belonged to Jisoo, not San-min. But Jisoo was S-rank. His blood, his sweat, his fingerprint on the card carried traces of S-rank mana. Enough. Not perfect, but enough. Jiun tossed the giant's core and the card with the fingerprint into the cell. Caihong was running the calculations. Probability of success, 74%. Temperature loss in case of failure, 3.1 degrees. At his current 35.9, that meant 32.8 if it failed. Critical. He initiated the synthesis. The cell flashed. 1 second. 2. 5. The system was processing. Caihong held the formula. Sweat trickled down her temple despite the cold. Synthesis successful. Received. SEP breaker. Rank S. Single use. Radius of effect, 50 meters. Neutralizes 1 skill control link. 35.7. He activated the artifact and hurled it from the wall. A pale blue sphere flew over the fighters' heads and exploded above San-min. Silently. The bloody threads tearing apart the golems trembled, froze, and fell, like dead vines. San-min screamed. His skill had shut down. Not permanently, for a minute, maybe 2, but a minute was enough. The golems he had been grinding down all regenerated at once. 30 icy bodies rose from the snow simultaneously, and a wave of white ice engulfed the second wave of the core like a tsunami. San-min retreated. His fighters fled. Not all of them. 130 out of 200 broke free. 70 lay in the snow, alive, broken. Just like the first time, Jiun ordered them not to kill. 2 strikes, 2 waves. 270 fighters out of 400 were taken out of action or locked in an icy box. 130 remained. three generals, and Quan Desok, who stood before the collapsed section of the wall and looked at the citadel with new eyes. He activated his personal scanner, aimed it at the wall, at the figure in the white cloak. A number. 2,100,000 OU. Quan slowly lowered the scanner. He had fought for 30 years. He had seen S-rank hunters. He himself was S-rank. But 2,100,000 was SSS territory. It was territory inhabited by only a select few. And the man on the wall wasn't just living there. He was building fortresses, creating armies, neutralizing S-rank skills with synthesized artifacts. This was something beyond classification. Quan turned to Namgyun, thermal spear, a skill brought specifically to pierce the icy defenses. Quan said one thing: "It's your turn." Giyong stepped forward. The spear in his hand glowed orange. Heat. Real heat. The temperature around him jumped 20 degrees. Snow melted beneath his feet. He was the antithesis of everything Jiyun had built. Fire against ice. Heat against cold. Giyong picked up speed. The spear left a trail of melted snow and steam behind him. He was aiming for Jiyun, personally, because the order stated that the fortress commander was the primary target. On the wall, Jiyun didn't move. He watched the approaching spear and calculated. Speed, trajectory, angle. Then he looked at the Archon beside him. 150,000 HP. Not enough against an S rank with 550,000. But the Archon wasn't alone. A second Archon stood at the gate. 150,000. A total of 300,000. Still not enough. But if not to stop it, then to redirect it. Jiyun gave the command to both Archons simultaneously. Do not attack. Block the way. The first Archon leaped from the wall toward Gion. 4 meters of ice against a thermal spear. Gion struck. The spear passed through the Archon as if through butter. The ice melted, evaporated. The Archon split in two. But at the moment of the split, his hands, blades, closed around the spear. Not to break it, to hold it back. For half a second. Gion yanked the spear free. The second Archon was already in front of him. The same maneuver. The spear pierced through. The ice crumbled. The blade hands closed around the shaft. Another half second. A total delay of 1 second. In that second, Jiyun leaped down from the wall. The blade of empty resonance in his hand. A gray blade with blue veins. Property. Ignores the target's cold resistance. The thermal spear gave Gion absolute protection against cold. The blade ignored absolute protection against cold. Gion saw Jiyun at the last moment. He spun around. The spear shot forward. Jiyun didn't dodge. He stepped into the blow. The spear went through his left shoulder, right through it. The heat seared the wound. Blood sizzled and evaporated. But the blade had already entered Gion beneath his ribs, up to the hilt. The S-class general looked down, at the gray blade in his body, at the blue veins that pulsed as if alive. His thermal protection had failed. For the first time in his life, the cold reached him from within. Gion fell. The spear went dark. Jiyun pulled out the blade. Gion's blood on the blade froze instantly. It turned to frost. It became part of the blade. Jiyun stood over the S-class general's body, a hole in his left shoulder from which steam was rising. Quan Desok watched this from a distance of 300 meters. His scanner beeped. Jiyun's stats jumped. 2,100,000 plus the essence from absorbing an S-rank skill through the blade. 2,150,000. 2,200,000. The growth didn't stop. The blade drank the slain man's power. Quan took a step back, for the first time in 30 years. Quan Desok stood on the plain and looked at Gion's corpse. 30 years of war. 3 cataclysmic crises, 12 S-rank monster hunts. He had never once seen a general killed in a single exchange. The scanner on his belt continued to update June's number: 2,250,000, 2,280,000. The growth was slowing, but not stopping. The blade was still digesting Gion's essence. Quan turned to San Min. He stood there, pale. The bloody chain had regenerated, but his hands were trembling. The skill neutralization had left its mark. The counter skill had struck his mana channels, and now every strand San Min released was thinner and weaker than before the battle, by about 30%. From 580,000 MP, he had effectively dropped to 400,000. Quan calculated. He himself had 620,000. San Min had 400,000 effective HP, 130 fighters, a total of about 2,800,000. Against Jiun's 2,280,000 HP, plus 150 golems, plus a garrison of 35 hunters, plus a fortress made of S-rank material. The numbers didn't add up. For the first time during this operation, Quan allowed himself to entertain a thought he had refused to consider since receiving the order: that they had been sent to their deaths. That Tae-1-1 knew the true power of the target, that Du-hyun had underreported the data and Teok-1 hadn't checked. Or he had checked and sent them anyway, because 400 hunters were expendable, and the information they would obtain at the cost of their lives was worth more. Quan contacted the camp. The connection only worked within the jamming perimeter. He ordered all combat-ready personnel to retreat to the transport vehicles. San Min objected. He said that Taewon's order was unambiguous: destroy. Quan looked at him for a long time. Then he said that orders are given by those who stand in the warmth, while those who stand in the cold die, and that he had no intention of throwing the rest of the men into the snow for someone else's convenience. San Min fell silent. The corps began its retreat, not a rout, an organized one, with cover. The wounded were loaded onto the transport vehicles. 100 fighters from the icebox emerged when the golems parted the walls. They walked in silence, unarmed, unskilled, many without helmets, hair covered in frost, eyes empty. They had spent 2 hours in icy captivity, at minus 75 degrees. The heat generators on their belts died after 40 minutes. For the remaining hour 20, they warmed each other with their bodies, like animals. A-rank officers who had entered the breach confident they would wipe out a handful of monsters in a burrow. They emerged as different people. Jiun stood on the wall and watched as the corps marched away. The black line dissolved into the white blizzard. Nearby, Minsu was tallying the corpus casualties. 1 S-class general killed, 1 S-class general weakened by 30%, 72 fighters with fractures and third-degree frostbite, 38 with minor injuries. Citadel casualties: 2 archons destroyed, 11 golems destroyed beyond repair. June's left shoulder wound, a through-and-through. Kai Hong had already treated it. A synthesized B-rank regenerator was drawing the tissue together. In a day, a scar will remain. In 2, he'll forget it. Minsu finished her tally and looked at June. He wasn't celebrating. He wasn't smiling. He was looking south, toward where the core column had disappeared, and thinking about something else. General Quan is alive. General San Min is alive. Over 300 fighters will return to the frontier. They will tell the story. Each will tell their own version, but the gist will be the same. There is a fortress in the wasteland. In the fortress is a man with an OU over 2 million. A dead man, Han Ji-un. The news will reach Taiwan. It will reach the council, to every screen in every tower. The dead do not build fortresses. The dead do not kill generals. The dead do not accumulate 2,280,000 OU in 28 days. A legend, a monster, the ghost of the wasteland. Whatever they called him, he now existed in the information field. He couldn't be erased back. That night, Ji-un went down to the underground hall where Chae-hong was working by the light of 3 ice lamps. She was sitting over formulas she was writing directly on the floor with charcoal. Complex, multi-layered, equations he didn't understand. She looked up when he entered. She asked how his shoulder was. He said it was fine. She nodded and went back to the formulas. He sat down next to her, silently. After a minute, he asked one thing. She said she knew his skill better than anyone except the system itself. She knew that the reactor drew heat. She knew that compatible material bypassed the circuit board. And she knew something else. Something she didn't say in front of everyone. The reactor was evolving, not linearly, exponentially. Each new OU level unlocked new functions. At 1 million, mass synthesis unlocked. At 2 million, something. She didn't know exactly what. But her formulas showed a spike at the 3 million mark, an anomaly in the growth curve, a tipping point beyond which the reactor entered a phase she called deep resonance. She didn't know what that meant. Her data was insufficient. But she knew that Lin Wei in Beijing had seen similar curves in his research on the shards, and that he had shut down the lab the day after he saw them, shut it down and left. Not out of fear, out of respect for what lay behind the numbers. Jian listened, silently. Then he asked how much time she needed to calculate the optimal path to 3 million. Chae-hong replied that at the current rate of growth and with the available supply of compatible material, it would take 15 days, unless the council sent the army sooner. He stood up. He walked toward the exit. He stopped. Without turning around, he said he didn't need 15 days. He needed 30. Because the council would send the army. And he wanted his number to be on the board next to Jisoo's name when the army arrived. Not next to it, above it. Kai-hong watched his back. For the first time ever, something other than professional interest flashed in her eyes. Something like understanding. Or anxiety. Because she saw the formulas. And the formulas said that 3 million wasn't the ceiling. It was a door. And no one knew what lay beyond that door. On the morning of the 29th, June restored both archons. New ones. Stronger than the previous ones. The corpses of A-rank monsters plus the fragments of Gion's body that the blade hadn't managed to devour. Each new archon carried 180,000 OU, a 20% increase. The citadel was being restored, the wall rebuilt in a day, the traps reconfigured, new trenches, new false passages. Sonho worked without rest. Ilhan trained the fighters. 22 A-rank hunters who had seen a single man kill an S-class general. They trained with a different motivation now, not out of fear, out of a desire to prove themselves. Minsu restored a fragment of communication with the guild network by bypassing the jammer via an underground repeater that Taehyun found in one of the deep caverns. Old, pre-war, but it worked. She caught the news feed. The headline had changed. Not about Jisoo, not about the frontier, about the wasteland. Anomalous object in the northern square destroyed a punitive core patrol group. That's how they framed it. Not a fortress, an object. Not a person, an anomaly. Didn't defeat, destroyed. The words were chosen, every single one. Jisoo controlled the media. He couldn't allow Han Ji-eun's name to appear in the headlines. A dead man must remain dead. But he couldn't control the guild's leaderboard. The board updated automatically, the system's algorithm. No censorship. And on the board, in the ranking column, was a name. Han Ji-eun. 2,300,000 OU. Position? Unknown. Status? Unconfirmed. One line down, Han Ji-soo. 1,980,000 OU. Rank 4. Status: confirmed. Minsu read both names aloud. The entire hall heard. 35 fighters, 12 outcasts. Cai Hong, Song Ho, Il Han. They all looked at Ji-un. He was standing by the wall. His face was calm, hands behind his back, a blade at his hip, a scar on his shoulder beneath his cloak. 2,300,000 against 1,980,000. The dead man outranks the living. And in the Han clan's bunker, Yerin stood in front of the screen in the dining hall, a tray in her hand, rice and soup on the tray. She looked at the two names on the board, and the tray trembled. She was shivering, as if from the cold. But it was 22 degrees Celsius in the bunker. Behind her, Jisoo entered the dining hall. He saw the screen. He saw his brother's name. He saw the number. His expression didn't change. He took the tray from Edin's hands. He set it on the table. He sat down. He began to eat. His chopsticks moved smoothly. The rice disappeared, portion by portion. No one in the dining hall was looking at him. Everyone was looking at the screen. And Jisoo ate and thought. And the next move was already forming in his head. Not the core. The core had failed. He needed something else, something personal, something that would strike not the walls, but the people behind them. Jisoo had the transfer contract, the same artifact. It worked both ways. You could take skills, or you could give them away. And Jisoo had something his brother didn't. 12 lesser clans. In each, an heir with a skill. Heirs whom no one would miss because they were already written off. The contract could take their skills and merge them into a single vessel, into him. On top of the stolen SSS, the cost, other people's lives. A price Jisoo had already paid once without batting an eye. He finished his rice, placed his chopsticks neatly, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and left the dining hall without glancing at the screen even once. On the 30th day, Minsu intercepted a signal that made her hands freeze over the tablet. The frequency of Jisoo's personal channel. Unencrypted. Open. On purpose. He wanted them to hear. Jisoo's voice sounded calm, like a morning news anchor. He addressed his brother directly, called him by name. Han Ji-woon. Said he was glad his brother was alive. He said he regretted what had happened. He said he was ready for negotiations. And at the end, his voice softened, almost warm. He said he was sending a sign of goodwill, a gift. Erin. He was sending So Erin to the citadel walls unescorted, like a bride being returned to her groom, like an apology, like a bridge. Minsu turned off the recording. She looked at Ji-un. He was standing by the wall with his eyes closed. The silence lasted 10 seconds. Then he opened his eyes and asked Cai Hong how many skills Jisoo could absorb through the transfer contract before his body failed. Cai Hong answered without hesitation. A B-rank contract. Bandwidth is limited. 4 skills maximum on top of the base. 5. And the mana channels burst. Death of the host. 4 skills. If each heir of a minor clan is worth between 100,000 and 300,000 OU, 4 absorptions is 400,000 to 1,200,000 on top of that. 1,980,000 plus a million. 3 million OU. The contract's ceiling. Jisoo isn't a fool. He'd done the same math. Edin isn't a gift. Edin is bait. While Ji-un is distracted by the woman who betrayed him, Jisoo will raid the junior clan's bunkers and collect skills. Every hour of delay is another victim, another number in his brother's tally. Sonho asked what to do with Edin. Ji-un replied, "Nothing. Let her go. Let her reach the walls. Let her see. And then, let her go back. Eden appeared on the plane 2 days later, alone, in a winter coat over a uniform, a heat generator on her belt, a backpack on her back. She walked with confidence. She didn't stumble. She didn't fall. She was prepared for this trek, equipped, supplied. Jisoo had taken care of it. She approached the citadel walls and stopped. She looked up. Walls of eternal ice, towers, the Archon on the ledge, golems at their posts, and figures on the top wall, fighters in white cloaks. Among them, one, in the center. She recognized him by his silhouette, by the way he stood, by his habit of keeping his hands behind his back. She stood below and looked up at him. He stood above and looked down at her. 7 meters of wall between them. 32 days. And the number 2,300,000 hanging in the air like a verdict on everything she had chosen. Eren spoke up, loudly, so that everyone on the wall could hear. She said that Jisoo had forced her, that she hadn't wanted to, that the syringe in her hand wasn't there of her own free will, that she loved him, Ji-eun, always, that it could be fixed, that she was ready to stay. A beautiful voice, perfect intonation, a pause in just the right place. Just like back then, in the bunker, when she said she couldn't marry a man without skills. The same professional performance. Ji-eun was silent. Min-soo stood nearby. Her fists were clenched so tightly that her nails dug into her palms. 13 years. She remembered how Eden used to adjust her cousin's collar, how she smiled, how she brought him kalguksu. She remembered every detail because the archivist didn't know how to forget. Jian turned and walked down from the wall, without saying a word, not a single one. Eden stood in front of the closed gates. No one let her in. No one kicked her out. No one hit her. No one insulted her. They simply didn't answer her. She stood there for an hour. The wind was -73. The heat generator hummed. Then she turned and walked back, south, her back straight. Her stride was steady. But Ilhan, who had been watching her through binoculars from the wall, later told Sono that her shoulders were trembling, not from the cold. 3 days later, in the bunker, Eden entered Jisoo's office and said the plan hadn't worked. Jisoo wasn't surprised. He was sitting at his desk. Before him lay the transfer contract, list of 4 names, the heirs of the lesser clans, those who hadn't been cast out yet, those who were still sitting in the bunkers, thinking they were safe. Jisoo smiled. He said the plan wasn't supposed to work. The plan was meant to buy time, 5 days, while Eden was on her way there, while she was waiting, while she was on her way back. 5 days during which Jisoo worked. The first heir, the Min clan, Min Taejin, skill, ice shield, A rank, 280,000 OP. Contract activated at night, paralyzing poison, the same syringe, the same method. Taejin didn't wake up. The skill transferred to Jisoo. 1,980,000 plus 280,000, 260,000 OP. Second heir, the Yoon clan, Yoon So-hee. Skill, gravitational grip, A rank, 310,000 OP, 2,570,000. Third, the Baek clan, Baek Un-ho. Skill, shadow blade, A rank, 250,000 OU, 2,820,000. 3 skills in 5 days. The 3 heirs lay in medical capsules, without skills, without a future, without a voice. Alive, technically. Fourth, last, the Cha clan, Cha Yeon-soo. Skill, destroyer, S rank, 420,000 OU. The strongest of the 4, the most dangerous. Poison won't work on him. S rank resistance would burn through D rank poison in a second. Jisoo needed something else. He called for Taekwon. The guild chairman entered the office. He sat down across from him. He looked at the contract. at the list, at the 3 crossed out names, at the 4th. Taewon said he had S-rank poison, 1 dose, in his personal safe, an artifact worth more than the entire Cha clan. He was willing to give it up, but in return, he wanted one thing. When Jisoo reached his maximum, when his number exceeded his brother's, Taewon wants Jisoo to go into the wasteland alone, in person, and bring back the head. Not the body, the head. Because converters are needed alive for synchronization. But the 8th converter is an anomaly and must be eliminated before it becomes uncontrollable. Jisoo took the poison without hesitation. The 4th absorption took place that same night. Cha Yeon-soo woke up in a medical pod without his skill and screamed so loudly that security locked the unit doors. Jisoo stood in front of the mirror in his room, the status window before his eyes. 3,240,000 OU. His mana channels were burning. His body trembled from the overload. 4 foreign skills on top of the stolen SSS. The contract was creaking at its limit. A 5th skill would kill him. But 4, he could handle 4. 3,240,000 against Jiun's 2,300,000. Higher again, ahead again. He smiled at the mirror. The mirror didn't smile back. Because the face in the mirror was gray. His eyes were red from burst blood vessels. His hands were shaking. Jisoo's body was rejecting the foreign skills like transplanted organs. He was burning from the inside. But the number stood firm. 3,240,000. And that was all that mattered. On the guild board, the update happened at 4 in the morning. Han Ji-soo, 3,240,000 OU, rank 2, global ranking. Below him was only one unconfirmed contact in the wasteland, with 2,300,000. Min-soo saw the number first. She was sitting by the repeater, monitoring the network like she did every night. When the board updated, she froze. 3,240,000. An impossible figure for a person who 2 weeks ago was stuck at 1,980,000 with no progress. She ran to Ji-yoon. He wasn't sleeping. He was standing in the underground hall, working with the reactor. Mass synthesis. 20 cells simultaneously. Kai Hong was nearby. Formulas, calculations, optimization. Min-soo ran in and called out the number. 3,240,000. Ji-yoon stopped the synthesis. He looked at Min-soo, then at Tai Hong. Kai Hong turned pale. Not because of the number, because of what stood behind it. 4 absorptions through the contract. 4 people without skills. She quietly named them. She knew the heirs. Min Tae-jin had studied with her at the same academy. Yoon So-hee was a friend, had been. Ji-eun listened. His face was impassive. Then he turned toward the wall. He placed his palm on the compatible material. He closed his eyes and spoke softly. So softly that only Min-soo, standing nearby, could hear. Every number, with percentages. Min-soo nodded. She took out her tablet, added 4 names to the list. Not enemies, victims. Those who needed to be accounted for. Ji-eun worked. The 35th day, the 36th, the 37th. Chae-hong didn't leave the reactor. The resonance formula burned around her hands with a golden light for 18 hours a day. She calculated every synthesis down to 1/100th of a degree. She found combinations that Ji-eun himself hadn't seen. The core of an ice monster, plus Ji-eun's blood, plus a shard of compatible material. A triple synthesis. Before, he'd thrown in 2 ingredients. Chae-hong proved that 3 ingredients yielded a result an order of magnitude higher with the same heat output. A triple synthesis from an A-rank core yielded not 12,000 OU, but 45,000. A difference that changed everything. On the 35th day, the OU surpassed the 2,500,000 mark. On the 36th day, 2,700,000. On the 37th, 2,900,000. Che-Hong watched the growth curve on her formulas, and her hands trembled. Not from fatigue, from anticipation. 3 million was approaching, the tipping point, deep resonance, the door to the unknown. June felt it too, not in the formulas, in his body. The reactor pulsed, not like a machine, like an organ, like a second heart beating to a rhythm different from the first. With every 1,000 OU, the pulsation grew stronger. With every synthesis, the reactor responded faster, more eagerly, as if waking up. Sonho was training the garrison. 40 fighters, including Ilhan's men, moved like a single mechanism. Ilhan had reorganized his tactics. No head-on collisions, mobile fives. Each 5-man unit was linked to a group of 10 golems, a human and golem. Humans command, golems obey. 50 fighters and 200 golems are not an army. They are a network, flexible, fast, unpredictable. Minsu lived in the flow of information. She deciphered every fragment. She pieced together the picture. By the 37th day, she knew the locations of all 7 council towers. She knew the names of 6 of the 7 bearers of the core fragments. She knew the schedule of Teokwon's guard shifts. She knew that Kwon Dae-sok had returned to the frontier headquarters and submitted his resignation. The report was rejected. Kwon was relieved of command and assigned as an observer, an honorary exile. He had seen too much and lost too little. Chae Do-hyun was acting as well, quietly, from the inside. On the 36th day, he made contact. Not directly, through a chain of 3 intermediaries. The last intermediary turned out to be a scout golem that Jiun had sent beyond the perimeter a week ago. The golem brought a capsule. Inside the capsule was a flash drive. On the flash drive was a dossier, 200 pages, the structure of the Council of 7 Towers, financial flows, decision protocols, liquidation lists, the names of those who had been into the snow over the past 3 years. Not 12, 47. 47 people whom the council had sentenced to death in the wasteland. 12 survived because Jiun found them. 35 did not. Minsu read the names of the dead aloud. Her voice was steady, without a tremor. The archivist did not cry. The archivist recorded. 35 names were added to the list alongside the 4 heirs whose skills Jisoo had taken. The list grew. Jiun stood by the wall and listened. Then he took the flash drive. He looked at it. Small, light. It weighed less than a bullet, but it held enough to bury the council. Not now, when the time comes. He put the flash drive in his inventory. The compartment closed. On the 38th day, June reached 3 million OU. It happened at midnight, quietly, without explosions, no glow. He stood in the underground hall and completed another triple synthesis. Tsai Hong announced the result. Standard, core plus blood plus shard, 45,000 OU. Total 3,002,000. And the reactor stopped. It didn't break. It stopped, like a mechanism that had reached the end of one program and switched to another. Silence inside. The pulsation vanished. For a second, Ju felt as though the device had died. That 3 million was the ceiling, and nothing beyond. Then the status window flashed. Not blue, not gold, black. Black light. 2 words that made no sense and made all the sense at the same time. Deep resonance activated. Function unlocked. Reality overwrite. Range. 1 meter from the carrier. Limitation. Only inanimate matter. 1 meter. He could change everything within a 1 meter radius. Stone into gold. Ice into fire. Air into a wall. Emptiness into a blade. Not through synthesis, not through cells, directly, by will. He raised his hand, looked at the stone floor beneath his feet. Thought. The floor became a mirror, a smooth, reflective surface. Perfect. He thought again. The mirror became steel. He thought. The steel became eternal ice. 3 transformations in 3 seconds. No heat loss, no cells, no ingredients. Cai Hong stood 2 meters away, and her formulas floated around her in complete silence. She wasn't breathing. She was witnessing the impossible. The converter was operating in true mode, not through the crutch of equipment, directly. 1 meter, just 1 meter for now, but the formula said the radius would grow. With every million OU. At 4 million, 2 meters. At 5, 3. At 10, she didn't want to count to 10. Because at 10 million, the radius of reality overwrite reached 20 meters. And a 20-meter radius of reality overwrite isn't a skill. It's a god's function. June lowered his hand. He looked at Cai Hong. She was looking at him. There was no fear in her eyes. There was a question. That one question that had mattered from the moment she entered the citadel. Who would he become when the numbers no longer had a ceiling? He didn't answer. He turned and walked to the wall. Up above, night. -78. Stars. For the first time in a month, the sky had cleared, and the stars hung low. Cold. Distant. Indifferent. He stood on the wall and looked south. Somewhere out there, Jisoo was sleeping in a warm room with 3,240,000 OU and 4 foreign skills that were burning him from the inside. And here stood a man with 3,002,000 OU, 238,000 less, but with a function that no one else in the world possessed: rewriting reality. 1 meter. Just 1 meter for now. He raised his hand. The air before his palm turned to ice, a thin sheet, transparent. He looked through it at the stars. Then he clenched his fist. The sheet turned to dust. The dust turned to nothing. Nothing became air again. The circle was complete. He lowered his hand and spoke softly. Into the darkness. Into the cold. Into the silent sky. Every digit, with percentages. From the 38th day to the 45th, June did not go to the surface. He worked below. The reactor in deep resonance mode devoured resources with an appetite that Cai Hong had not foreseen. The underground network of compatible material was shrinking. The walls that had seemed endless turned out to be finite. Taehyun scanned every day, and every day the network's perimeter shrank. Jiun was eating away at the rock from the inside. Cai Hong did the math. At the current rate, the material would last until 4,500,000 OU. Then they would have to return to conventional synthesis, to heat-based payment, to risk. Jiun listened and didn't change his pace. 4,500,000 would be enough. On the 42nd day, he passed the 3,500,000 mark and overtook Jisoo. 3,500,000 versus 3,240,000. The guild leaderboard updated. Han Jiun, rank unknown, 3,500,000 OU. World ranking? Number 1. For the first time. The entire planet saw that number. Every tower, every bunker, every screen. Number 1 in the world isn't just a number. It's a statement. It's a challenge to everyone who considered themselves the strongest. Lin Wei in Beijing opened the rankings. He looked at the name. He looked at the number. He closed his tablet. He took out his personal journal. He wrote the second entry in his entire record of observations. The first had been written on the 14th day, when a reconnaissance drone showed him the destruction of a patrol. Back then, he had written that something beyond the scale had been born in the wasteland. Now he wrote more succinctly. He won't come to me. I will go to him. when it's safe. He underlined the word safe twice. In the guild headquarters, Che Do-hyun stared at the display, his hand holding a cup of coffee frozen halfway to his mouth. Number 1. The man he had covered with an underreported assessment. The man for whom he had risked his career and his freedom. Now that man stood at the top of the world rankings, and Do-hyun realized that his gamble had paid off. Not entirely, but it had paid off. He finished his coffee, for the first time in a month, without spilling a single drop. On the 43rd day, June created the third Archon, not from a monster's corpse, from a re-recording. He took a chunk of eternal ice, placed his hand on it. He thought. The ice restructured itself, molecule by molecule. Not synthesis, not conversion, direct creation. The Archon stood before him, 3 meters tall, more compact than the previous ones, faster. HP 200,000, 11% taller than the previous ones. And most importantly, not a single cell was used to create him. Not a single ingredient, not a tenth of a degree, free of charge. Saihong recorded the parameters. Her hands didn't tremble. She was used to the impossible. But when Jiun created 7 more Archons in the same way over the next 2 days, she sat on the floor and stared silently at the ceiling for a minute. 10 Archons, a total of 2 million OU, created out of nothing. By the 45th day, the citadel had reached its final form, 3 rows of walls. The outer wall was 10 meters high, 4 meters thick, 20 towers. Gates made of rewritten material that could not be breached by anything below SS rank. 200 golems, 10 archons. 3 of them stood on the highest tower of the central keep, and their blue eyes could see 40 kilometers. The garrison, 40 fighters, 12 exiles. Saihong, Min-soo, Song-ho, Ilhan, Taehyun, Yuri. Everyone at their posts. Everyone in gear synthesized personally by Jiun. A-rank artifacts on each of them. Jiun's OU on the 45th day, 3,800,000. World ranking number 1. Reality overwrite radius, 1.5 meters. The blade of empty resonance on his hip. The cloak of the icy veil on his shoulders. A scar from the thermal spear on his left shoulder. Cold eyes. 26 years old. 45 days ago, he had nothing. 45 days ago, he was thrown out into the snow with nothing. He stood on the top platform of the keep and looked south. Min-soo approached. She stood beside him, a tablet in her hands. She said that Jisoo had advanced, not the corps, Jisoo personally, at the head of the army, 11,000 soldiers. The full strength of the Southern Front, plus mobilized reserves from the 5 towers, armored vehicles, mobile fortresses, jammer generators. The 3 remaining S-class generals, including Kwon, who had been recalled from retirement, and Jisoo himself. 3,240,000 OP, wearing the stolen cloak of the Han clan heir, with Irin in a command transport, with the transfer contract in his breast pocket. He was going to take the one thing he didn't have: victory over his brother. Min-soo gave the estimated time of arrival, 15 days. 11,000 men moved slower than 400. The vehicles were bogged down in the snow. The heat generators were guzzling energy. Logistics were a nightmare. 15 days. Jiun looked at Min-soo, then at the horizon, then at his hands. 3,800,000. In 15 days, he'll reach 4,500,000. Maybe higher. If he manages to select all the compatible material, maybe up to 5 million. The overwrite radius at 5 million, 2.5 meters. Not 20, not 10, 2.5. He won't become a god by this battle. He would become the man with the largest number in the world, and a fortress that yielded to nothing. That should be enough. He turned to Sono, who was standing behind him, waiting. He said one word. Get ready. Sono nodded. Ilhan nodded. Kai Hong nodded. Minsu clenched the tablet. Taehyun closed his eyes and activated the echo scanner. Yuri raised her hands and the thermal shield glowed like a golden dome over the central hall. The citadel was waking up. Not for defense, for the finale. Far to the south, Jisoo stood on the roof of the command transport. The wind ruffled the air's cloak. Behind him, 11,000 soldiers stretched across the plain like a black ribbon to the horizon. Eden was beside him. She was silent. She had been silent ever since the day she returned from the citadel walls. She was silent because for the first time in her life, she had not received a reply. And Jiun's silence rang in her head, louder than any scream. Jisoo did not look at her. He looked north, at the white field that stretched to the edge of the world. Somewhere out there, beyond the horizon, stood his brother, with a number higher than his own, with a fortress that shouldn't exist, with an army of ice, snow, and corpses. Jisoo clenched his fist. The contract in his pocket pulsed. 4 foreign skills burned in his channels. His body ached. Every day, every hour, the foreign power wouldn't take root. It was eating him from the inside like a parasite. 3,240,000 OU that were slowly killing their host. He had to end this quickly, before his body gave out, before his channels burst, before the number started to drop. He clenched his fist tighter. Blood oozed from under his fingernails. He didn't notice. They came on the 60th day, 82 degrees below zero outside the citadel walls. The plain had turned white, reduced to absolute emptiness. Not a single stone, not a shadow. Only snow and the horizon stitched together by a single line. And on that line, a black streak that grew with every passing hour. 11,000 men, armored personnel carriers, mobile fortresses on tracks, searchlights that sliced through the blizzard with black columns of light, jammer generators, heat generators, field hospitals, a 3-kilometer-long logistics train, an army, a real army, not a patrol, not a corps, a machine that Sotae-1 had been assembling for 3 weeks, and on which he had spent the budget of 4 towers. Taehyun counted with his eyes closed. 11,247 fighters, 832 units of equipment, 3 S-class generals, 17 A-rank officers on the front lines. Total firepower. He opened his eyes, looked at Jiun, named the figure. 22 million OU. Jiun stood on the donjon. The wind tore at his cloak. Nearby were Songho, Ilhan, Taihong, and Minsu. Below, on the walls, were 40 fighters, 200 golems, 10 archons. The citadel's total power. About 6 million OU, including Jiun's personal 4,800,000. His growth over the past 15 days had exceeded Taihong's estimates. The underground network yielded more material than Taehyun had seen in the scans. Deep layers, dense, saturated. 4,800,000. Overwrite radius, 2 meters. World ranking, number 1. With a lead of 1.5 million over second place. But 6 million against 22 million is a ratio of just over 1 to 3. Sonho knew this math. Ilhan knew it. Every fighter on the wall knew it. They stood and looked at the black line, and their faces were calm because they had already seen how Ji-un had defied the odds before. At dawn, the army stopped 2 kilometers away, set up camp, did not attack, waited. At noon, an armored personnel carrier drove out of the camp. 1, slowly, straight toward the gates. Jisoo stood on the roof. Ji-un saw him from the donjon, the heir's cloak, that very one, black with gold trim, the Han clan crest on the back, the crest that Jisoo had ordered destroyed in all the archives next to Ji-un's name. But the crest was still there on that cloak, like a mockery. Standing next to Jisoo on the roof of the vehicle was Edin, in an officer's uniform, hair pulled back, face pale. She was looking at the citadel, and there was nothing on her face that Ji-un wanted to read. The vehicle stopped 500 meters away. Jisoo raised the megaphone. His voice carried across the plain, clear, confident, the voice of a man accustomed to being listened to. He called Ji-un by name, said he had not come to fight, said the council was ready to recognize Jun, to restore his name to the clan, to restore his status as heir, to grant him a seat in the Rue Béger, a general's post, with authority. The only condition? Surrender the citadel, disband the golems, undergo the council's scan, to join the system. He spoke at length, eloquently, every word in its place, every pause measured. Drone cameras circled over the plain and broadcast to all the tower's screens. Teokwan wanted the world to see. He wanted the world to see how magnanimous the council was, how reasonable Jisoo was, how insane anyone who refused would be. Ji-un listened, silently, hands behind his back. When Jisoo finished, the silence was so thick you could hear the wind scraping against the walls. Then Ji-un raised his hand. Chaehong behind him activated the protocol. 3 days ago, she hacked the guild's satellite channel. Not alone, with Min-soo. The archivist found the key. The resonance formula tuned the frequency. A hologram flashed over the plain, huge, 100 meters in diameter. It hung in the air between the citadel and the army. Everyone saw it. 11,000 soldiers, 3 generals, Jisoo, Edin, drone cameras, and through the cameras, every screen in every tower on the planet. On the hologram, 2 words and 1 number, Han-ji-un, 6 million OU. Number 1, globally. Beneath the number, a face, his face, just as it was on the day of the betrayal. Young, calm, with eyes that saw everything and forgave nothing. The army froze. 11,000 people stared at the hologram and the number, and in that silence, only the heat generators and the wind could be heard. In bunkers around the world, hunters stood before their screens. 6,000 OU. No such number had ever existed in the history of the system. The SSS benchmark stood at 2 million. This was 3 times higher. It was territory beyond classification. At the Guilds of the Guild headquarters, Che Do-hyun stood in front of the main screen, and coffee spilled from an overturned cup onto the floor. He didn't notice. He stared at the number and smiled for the first time in 20 years of service. In Beijing, Lin Wei opened his tablet. He looked at the number. He closed his eyes. His shoulders slumped. He realized that the word safe in his journal could be underlined as many times as he liked. It would never come. Because a man with 6 million OU doesn't wait for it to be safe to come to him. They come to him. Or they don't. There is no third option. Jisoo stared at the hologram. His face turned white. Not from the cold. 6 million against his 3,240,000. Almost double. An impossible difference. An impossible growth. 2 months ago, he took everything from his brother. Skill, name, fiancé, status. threw him out into the snow to die. And now the dead man hung over him as a hologram with a number that exceeded his own by almost twofold. The megaphone fell from his hands. It fell onto the roof of the transport. It rolled away. Eren picked it up. She held it out to him. Jisoo didn't take it. He stared at his brother's face on the hologram, and in his eyes was something Eren had never seen before. Not anger, not envy, fear. Pure, childlike. A younger brother's fear of an older brother who could do everything better. Always. Ever since childhood. The fear that was the very reason he had stolen the skill, because there was no other way to outdo him. Jisoo clenched his teeth. The fear lasted 3 seconds. Then the anger returned. Hot. Familiar. He jumped off the transport, gave the order.
Full assault. All 11,000. All 3 generals. All the equipment. Everything he had. The entire army against a single fortress. Right now. The army moved. A black wave across a white field. 22 million OU. The ground shook from their footsteps. June watched from above. His hand was still raised. The hologram glowed. And he thought about how Jisoo hadn't changed. Not in 2 months. Not in 22 years. He always struck first because he was afraid he wouldn't be able to strike second. The army advanced like a wall. The front ranks activated their skills, and the plain erupted. Fire, ice, lightning, steel. Thousands of combat skills at once. The air hummed with the concentration of mana. The snow beneath their feet melted and immediately froze again because minus 82 degrees defeated any fire. General Quan Di walked in the front row, not by order, by choice. He saw the citadel's walls. He saw the hologram. He knew that 6 million was no bluff. He walked because 30 years of war had taught him one thing. If you can't avoid going, then go first. San Min was beside him. The bloody chain was deployed. The threads were thinner than before the counterattack, but there were more of them. Hundreds, thousands. A red web above the soldiers' heads, ready to crash down on the walls. The third general, Ha Min-jung, the replacement for the fallen Gion. Skill, stone armor, S rank, 600,000 OP, defensive type. His job? To hold the front line against a counterattack. 11,000 soldiers, 3 generals, a wall of bodies and skills. The largest military operation since the puncture. The citadel gates opened, not from a blow, from the inside. The gates swung apart, and 300 figures emerged from the darkness of the opening. 200 golems, 100, no, 300. Jiyun synthesized the last 100 overnight, mass synthesis at its limit. The remnants of compatible material, the last resources of the underground network. Everything that had been invested that night. 300 golems, 10 archons, a formation of white ice that moved without a sound. Claws, blades, tails, blue eyes in 3 rows. Behind them, 10 archons, 4 meters each, blade hands, faceless faces. Behind the archons on the walls, 40 fighters with A-rank artifacts. Ilkhan in the center, skill activated. The cleaving blade hums. Sonyo on the left flank, steelskin gleams. Golems and humans, together. A unit Ilkhan had trained for 30 days. Jiyun stepped out last, alone. Through the gate, past the line of golems, past the archons, forward, into the open space between the 2 armies. A gray jacket, that very one. He put it on over his cloak, the jacket they'd thrown him out in. Dirty, torn. Minsu had patched it up on the 3rd day. He could have worn anything. The reality overwrite allowed him to create armor out of thin air. He chose the jacket because Jisoo had to recognize it, and Irin, and everyone who saw him being carried through the service airlock. He stopped, raised his hand.
the same one he'd held up when the hologram lit up. Through it went control of the reactor. Through it went the reality overwrite. Through it came 300 golems and 10 archons and walls and towers and everything he had created in 60 days. Jisu's army was 800 meters away and closing in. The ground shook. The searchlights were blinding. Mana hummed like a transformer before an explosion. 700 meters, 600, 500. Jiun lowered his hand. The archons moved. 10 figures, 4 meters, 200,000 horsepower each, 2 million total. They weren't running. They were walking, steadily, in a line, like a wall of ice stone moving toward another wall of people and machinery. The first clash. An archon crashed into the front line, and its blade arms sliced through the first row as if through paper. The body armor didn't hold. A-rank shields didn't hold. An SS-class archon with 200,000 HP isn't a monster. It's a natural disaster in human form. 3 archons entered the left flank, 2 into the right, 5 struck the center. The army's formation collapsed. Not immediately. The front ranks collapsed inward. The rear pushed forward. A stampede. Screams. Skills flew in all directions. Half hit their own. Quan struck with shatter. The ground cracked beneath the archons. One fell into a crevice. He rose. The crack couldn't hold a creature from the eternal ice. San Min hurled the bloody chain. The threads entangled the archon, squeezed. The ice crunched. The archon slowed. San Min lunged. The threads dug deeper. The archon split, shattered into fragments. 1 of 10. 9 continued. 300 golems followed. A wave of white ice. Wolves, snakes, bears they did not kill. June gave the same order as in the first battle. Break. Do not kill. Arms, legs, weapons, equipment. Take them out of commission. Leave them alive. Because dead soldiers are martyrs, but living, broken soldiers are 11,000 witnesses who will tell the story. Every single one. This wasn't a battle. A battle is when 2 forces clash and the outcome is uncertain. Here, the outcome was clear from the very first minute. Jisu's army outnumbered the citadel, 22 million against 6 million. But those numbers were spread across 11,000 bodies. The average soldier carried 1,500 HP. An archon carried 200,000, a difference of 130 times. Each archon was worth a company. Each golem was worth a platoon. And they all regenerated. In the icy wasteland -82, the ice golems regenerated from their surroundings, endlessly. San Min tore them apart. They rose again. Quan shattered the ground beneath them. They reassembled. Minjung held a shield over the front line. An archon struck the shield. The stone armor withstood 1 blow. 2. On the 3rd, it cracked. On the 4th, it shattered. Minjung was sent flying 30 meters, alive, unconscious. The 3 S-class generals held out for 4 minutes. Quan destroyed 2 archons. San Min destroyed 1. 7 remained. 1,400,000 OU against an army that was already fleeing. Because after the 4th minute, the soldiers ran. Not all at once. First, the rear ranks, those who saw the front lines fall. Then the middle ranks. Then the officers. Then the generals. Quan didn't run. He stood and watched as his army crumbled, and his face was that of a man who knew this would happen. San Min ran. His threads trailed behind him through the snow like dead snakes. 7 minutes. 7 minutes passed from the first clash to the moment the last organized unit fell apart. 11,000 soldiers. 7 minutes. The field was littered with bodies, alive, broken, moaning. Armored vehicles stood dented and overturned. The searchlights had gone out. The jamming generators were destroyed. Silence. Only the wind and moans. Jisoo stood on the roof of the command transport, alone. The army was gone. The cloak was gone. The Archon had torn it off the moment he passed the transport. Eden stood behind the armored door inside the transport, peering through the viewing slit. No one had touched her.
Not a single golem had come within 5 meters of the transport. Jian's order: do not touch. Jisoo jumped from the roof. He ran. Where? Nowhere. A plain. White. Empty. He ran through the snow and his boots sank in. The stolen skills burned in his channels. His body was torn apart by pain. 3,240,000 OU that didn't help at all because he didn't know how to use them. He had stolen numbers, not skill. He stumbled, fell, got up, ran, fell again. The third time, he didn't get up. He crawled, through the snow, on all fours, just like that night when June was dragged out through the service airlock, only the other way around. June was coming toward him, calmly, in a gray jacket, a blade in his hand, not to strike, so that Jisoo could see, so that he would remember. He stopped 2 meters away, the radius of reality's rewriting. 2 meters. He could have turned Jisoo to ice with a single thought, to dust, to nothing. He didn't. Jisoo crawled toward him, grabbed his ankle. His fingers clenched the fabric of his boot. He was screaming that he was ready to give back the skill, that he had the contract, that Jiyun could take it all, everything that had been stolen, the skill, the status, the name, the clan. His voice was breaking. Tears froze on his cheeks. His younger brother, 22 years old, never having grown up, never having understood that power isn't what you take, but what you build. Jiyun looked down at him. His face was calm. His eyes were cold. He was counting. Not OU, not seconds. He was counting everything that had led to this moment. Calgux, the needle in the neck, the contract, minus 62. The gray jacket, the rat under the rock, the first synthesis, 12,000 out of nowhere, and 60 days that turned 0 into 4,800,000. He looked at Jisoo, opened his mouth, and spoke for the first time in the entire battle. Why do I need what was taken from me when I created from scratch? He turned around. He walked toward the citadel, without looking back. Blade sheathed, arm lowered, steady steps. Jisoo remained in the snow, lying down, face down. The contract had fallen out of his pocket and lay nearby, needed by no one. Eden stood by the transport. The door was open. She stepped out. She watched Jiyun's back, the gray jacket receding toward the citadel gates. No one touched her. No one called. Didn't look. Didn't say a word. 35 fighters on the walls, 200 golems on the field, 10 archons, Minsu on the keep, Sonho at the gates, Ilhan on the flank. Not a single one turned their head toward her. She stood alone, between the shattered army and the closing gates. And that was more terrifying than any blow. Because a blow is attention, but indifference is a void in which there isn't even an echo. The gates closed. Night fell. The temperature dropped to minus 84. Jisoo's army crawled south, the wounded on stretchers, equipment abandoned. The generals were silent. Quan walked last and never once looked back. Sanmin limped ahead. Minjung lay unconscious on a stretcher. 11,000 witnesses dragged their broken bodies across the wasteland, and each of them carried the same image in their minds. A man in a gray jacket, a raised hand, a hologram. 6 million,
7 minutes, and silence. Inside the citadel, a light burned, warm, golden. Yuri held the thermal shield over the central hall, and its dome shimmered like a small sun. The fighters sat along the walls, silent. Ilhan cleaned his blade. Sonho was checking the golem's injuries. Saihong was calculating formulas to repair the broken archons. Routine work after an extraordinary day. Jian stood in the throne room. Not the throne room. Ilkhan had nicknamed it that because it was the largest hall, and in the center stood a stone block resembling a chair. Jian had never sat in it. He stood nearby and looked at the wall where Minsu had drawn a list with charcoal. Names, positions, connections. Lines leading to the Council of the Seven Towers. He crossed out 3 lines. Corps officers whose orders had been decoded. General Guiyong, dead. Ilhan's patrol, defected. 3 lines out of 100. The beginning. Minsu ran into the hall, tablet in her hands, eyes wide. She hadn't run like that since the day she saw Jisu's rating at 3,240,000. She held out the tablet. On the screen, a satellite image. Siberia, northeast, 1,200 kilometers from the citadel. A second heat signature, identical in signature. Same brightness, same structure. Right angles, geometric lines, towers, walls. Someone had built a fortress, a second one, from the same material. In the center of the image, at the highest point of the structure, was a coat of arms. Taehyun zoomed in, an 8-pointed star. Ji-un stopped breathing. He knew that symbol.
He had seen it once, at 16, on a shard he had picked up in the schoolyard. The same design, the same geometry, the same star. Kai-hong approached. She looked at the image. She turned pale. She turned so pale that Song-ho stepped toward her, thinking she was losing consciousness. She wasn't. She stood there staring, her lips moving silently. Then she spoke aloud. 8th converter, you're not alone. Silence. The hall, the walls, the steam from their breath, the light of the thermal shield. Faces, Minsu, Sonho, Ilhan. Everyone was looking at Ji-un. He was looking at the photograph, at the star, at the fortress that shouldn't have existed because Kai-hong had said there were 7 converters. The council thought there were 7. Taehek-wan thought there were 7. Ji-un was the 8th, an anomaly, a mistake. But if there was a second fortress in Siberia made of the same material, if someone else had synthesized it, if someone else had picked up a shard, then there aren't 7 converters, not 8, maybe more, maybe a lot more. And the council's equation fell apart. A new line flashed in his status window. For the first time in 60 days, a new line he hadn't called up. He hadn't synthesized, hadn't activated. The line appeared on its own, as if the system had finally decided to speak. Resonance detected. Synchronization in 47 days. He read it, reread it. 47 days. Until what? Until synchronization. The council's 7 converters. Him, the one in Siberia, all at once. In 47 days. If synchronization occurs, terraforming will be complete. Earth will cease to be Earth. If he remains alive and does not enter synchronization, the process will fail. But now there was more than one variable. Now there was someone else. And this someone had built a fortress out of eternal ice and placed a crest on it with the same star as on the shard from the schoolyard. Friend, enemy, another anomaly, or something else entirely. Ji-un put away the tablet. He looked at Saihong, at Minsu, at Song-ho, at Ilhan, at every face in the hall. Then he turned toward the window. Outside the citadel's window, It had begun to snow, but not as usual, not from top to bottom. Snowflakes rose from the ground and flew upward, into the sky, slowly, beautifully, impossibly. The entire hall moved to the windows. They watched. The snow was falling upward. As far as the eye could see, white dots were breaking away from the ground and floating toward the black sky. Kai Hong whispered that it was resonance. Two converters are operating simultaneously, and reality between them is beginning to malfunction. Physics is breaking down. Gravity is locally changing its sign. This is only the beginning. In 47 days, it will be worse. Much worse. June stood by the window. The light from the rising snowflakes fell on his face. A gray jacket, a blade at his hip. 4,800,000 OU. World ranking number 1. 60 days ago, he was thrown out into the snow to die. He didn't die. He built a fortress. He gathered an army. He broke his brother. He raised his score from 0 to higher than anyone alive. And now he stood before something greater. Something that was greater than D. Jesus. Bigger than the council. Bigger than revenge. Something that threatened not him, the entire earth. He looked at the snow flying upward, then at his hand. 2 meters of reality rewritten. So far, 2. He clenched his fist, unclenched it. A snowflake flying past the window stopped. It hovered, then continued its upward path. He turned away from the window, looked at his people, at each one in turn. Minsu with his tablet, Sono with clenched fists, Ilhan with a blade, Kai Hong with formulas in his eyes, Taehyun with his eyes closed and his scanner active, Yuri with a golden shield above his head, 12 exiles, 40 fighters, 200 golems behind the walls, 10 archons on the towers, his people, his fortress, his numbers. He spoke quietly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. 47 days. That will be enough.